true as I'm standing here and as strange as this is, no suit could be prouder right now of his boys than I am of you guys.
Ahoy, everyone. My name is Bobby Shortle, and I'm here with Nick Rocco Scalia, and we are the Intrepid Filmographers. Every mini-series, we chart a course through the full filmography of an under-discussed genre or journeyman filmmaker. In this expedition, we do our best to try and be explorers, using our years of film knowledge to help guide us, but always being open to discovering new things about the medium we love so much. We are currently embedded in the films of Joseph Kosinski, and today, we make our way to Granite Mountain for his third film, Only the Brave, and find out if we want to get a piece of its Carolina ass. Nick, we're three films in now. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. Episode 3, I like to call it Tokyo Drift. We've made it to that point of the franchise now, and we'll see where things go from here.
Is Vin Diesel going to show up at the end?
Of course he is. What are you going to do without Vin Diesel showing up at the end? I always, every time I think of those movies, like I'm not the biggest Fast and Furious fan, but my wife does the greatest Vin Diesel impression.
Oh, really?
And yeah, so I say that I like that franchise more than I do because we've just had a lot of fun going to see these movies that are mediocre to okay to slightly good. But
some of them are better. Like I think Fast 5 is
Fast 5 is really solid. Yeah,
genuinely a really good action movie. And I think 6 is also pretty good as well. I haven't seen anything after 6, so I can't speak to them.
I saw 7. I definitely saw 7. I might have seen 8, and I gave up somewhere around 8.
Okay, all right. There's 10 of them now, you know.
Did they not get to 11 yet?
No, 10 was the one that came out. X was the one that came out last year or year before. I don't remember when it came out. The one with Momoa, which I hear is absolutely atrocious. Even people who like those movies are like, that this movie was terrible.
Well, anyway, I do have like this affinity for them, and it's literally just because of her, because we went to see, I guess it was probably Fast 5, and like just I can't even do it. Like I'll never do it justice, but goddamn, is it funny.
The fourth one, which is called Fast and Furious, has one of my favorite taglines of a movie ever. Because they're all back, right? Everyone's been gone since movie 1, basically. Everyone's back in movie 4. And the tagline was new model, original parts.
I love that. Yeah, we have talked about that.
Such a good tagline. It's in the trailer. I'm like, oh man, the marketing team, whoever came up with this slogan deserves a raise for sure for this film. And then that film was just okay. It has a really fun, like, chase sequence in through tunnels, like going under the border or whatever.
The cold open to that one's pretty good too. Where I guess it's probably not exactly a cold open, but it kind of sets things up.
I don't really remember it that well. I think I've seen it one time. But we're not here to talk about Fast and the Furious. We're
not. Although I will say, imagine what that franchise would have been if Joseph Kosinski had taken over that series at some point around like 2013, 2014. I think it might be in a more interesting place than where it is now, which is space.
Well, yeah, it's gone on too long at this point. But sure. John M. Chu and
what's that Saw guy?
Jason. What? My God, Jason Wan. Yes, right.
James Wan.
Oh my God, James Wan. But also it's oh my God, Justin Lin. Justin Lin, who really kind of brought it back and did did Fast 5 and stuff like that.
All three of them have made at least a movie in that series, right?
Yes. Okay. All three of them. Yes,
I thought so. Okay.
They have. They absolutely have. F. Gary Gray has made a movie in that series. Rob Cohen. John Singleton, right? Made the second one, I think.
Too Fast, Too Furious, yes.
Yeah. I think the third one was when Justin Lin came on. And I think he did 3, 4, and 5. I think. I could be wrong about this. Anyway, we're not, maybe when we do our Justin Lin series, we'll talk about this. We're in our third film for Joseph Kosinski. And we're not doing any more. We're not doing any more science fiction. There's no science fiction up in here. We're not going onto the grid. We're not in a post-apocalyptic world where Tom Cruise is talking to a triangle. That's not. We're not there.
Oh, good.
Yeah. We are here to talk about Only the Brave, which is the true story of the Granite Mountain Hotshots, which are a forest firefighting division in Arizona. It's based on a true story, and it was his follow-up to Oblivion. But obviously, like we talked about last time, Oblivion was very much, it was kind of his baby. And this feels more like he kind of was brought onto it, right? Nick, you did our dossier this week, so I don't know if you want to take the lead a little bit on discussing maybe the development of the movie.
Yeah, which was kind of unclear to me, which is interesting because, yeah, it was not something that he had been developing for a while the way he had with Oblivion, and he created the graphic novel, and that was kind of the start of his feature filmmaking career. This was it was a true story, obviously, and then a GQ article by Sean Flynn called No Exit, which was an early working title for the film, which maybe would have been. This is another one of those titles. We're going to have to talk a lot about marketing, I feel like, tonight, because I feel like marketing really did this film a disservice in a number of ways. And one of them was just it ended up with this title that it's a perfectly fine title, but also fairly generic, I would say. Something that, like, this was the one movie, before we get too much into it, it kind of just strikes me that when we first started talking about the show and we were first kicking around names of directors, and then we kind of settled on Joseph Kosinski, we didn't know we were going to do him first. And so we're just going through the filmography, and you said this title, and I was like, I have no idea what that is. And I'm the kind of person, I know you are too, that prides myself on at least being aware of movies, right? Like, you know, when things came out, roughly who was in them, maybe who directed them, what they did at the box office. This flew so far under my radar, and it's not a low budget movie. It was made for a sort of wide release. It was shot in a format pretty close to IMAX. It was released in IMAX theaters. Like, the intention here was for this to be something pretty significant, pretty substantial. And I knew nothing about it. Like, I heard that title and was like, oh, is that like one of those cop movies? I confused it with, I keep seeing like just an ad on my streaming services for something called Pride and Glory with Edward Norton and Colin Farrell, which I love both of those actors, and I generally like those kinds of movies. I guess I thought this was that, if I knew anything about it. Apparently that movie's terrible, because I went right over to Metacritic and I'm like, oh man, I should see this movie with these two actors that I like a lot. And turns out that I probably shouldn't see that movie, Pride and Glory. But yeah, so kind of a generic do-nothing title that makes it sound like maybe something that it isn't. But again, based on the GQ article and like everything that I saw about this, like it seemed like Kosinski was one of the first people hired, but definitely that he was hired, right? Like the studio was going to make this movie. They were looking for someone who could kind of handle something of this size and scale. I mean, at this point, I think it's going to be an interesting discussion on this too, because I don't know that, like, at least what we got in the final version of this is a very strongly character-driven movie. And although it is about, a team fighting wildfires, so there's definitely spectacle and action and scope and scale in that, it really is, really does come down to the idea of brotherhood and heroism and like what these firefighters are like when they're not out like in the thick of it. I love the jargon in this movie, like fire is the bitch. There's a lot of stuff like that. And so, you need a director that can handle those kinds of things. I mean, there's a lot of husband and wife kind of moments between Josh Brolin and Jennifer Connelly's characters. There's this really nice sort of redemptive story, which I take is at least close to the truth, about Miles Teller's character. His name is Brendan McDonough, who kind of becomes the hero of the movie, a guy dealing with addiction who joins, kind of unexpectedly is able to join this elite firefighting team and kind of becomes like a pivotal member of it. And he was the only survivor of this fire that is chronicled in the movie. So, pretty heavy drama. It is certainly a tragedy in a lot of ways. And I don't know at the time if I was looking for a director to do this, seeing Tron Legacy and especially seeing Oblivion, like, is this your guy? And it turns out he was. Cards on the table right now. I think this is by far the best movie of his we've seen thus far. And we've only this is the middle of his filmography. He's only got 5 movies out at this point. Another one coming along next year. But this really feels like kind of something very different from the other two in a way. And someone had some pretty good foresight as far as getting him involved in this project, because I do think he did a pretty solid job with it.
I do think it's his best movie so far that we've watched. Even with that being said, I have a lot of I think, reservations or gripes about some of how the movie is constructed. Obviously, this is a true story. So it is a tragic true story as well. It's not like this is like a feel-good true story.
Right.
Any of the things that I sort of pick out as we go along here, as far as like character growth or whatever, is purely about what's on the page and the actors. Obviously, I don't know how this relates to them in real life. I don't know how much of it is true, how much of it is not, but there is a lot of, I will say, some non-specific tropey stuff that they use to sort of like shortcut us to certain, hopefully emotional places. And where I think that's where it drags the movie down a little bit for me. But that goes hand in hand with some other stuff like you were talking about, especially with like the firefighting stuff, which it seems very well researched, very specific. And the Teller character as well feels very specific to me. Yep. So I want there are some praise for me too, but there is some, I do have, some stuff that
I'm not calling this like a perfect movie. I certainly think there are things in it that don't work. And I do think a lot of that is on the script level, which this was written by pretty heavy hitters kind of all around here. Like the talent that was amassed for this movie, which, as we'll get into, did not make any money. This movie actually cost the studio a lot more than it made.
This was a big old flop. This was a huge flop. I didn't know it existed.
I knew nothing. Like literally this movie, like you could have just made this title up and told me this movie existed and I would have to go look it up. I would know nothing about it. So
yeah. So it was 4 years in between Oblivion and this. I just want to say he was in development on 3 movies that didn't go in between the two things. So there was a new Twilight Zone movie that was in the works at Warner Brothers that he was attached to. We mentioned, I think, in the Tron episode, the Black Hole remake. He did development work on that as well. And a movie called Go Like Hell, which was like Ford v Ferrari. Essentially, it was a competing Ford v Ferrari project that Tom Cruise was supposed to be in, and it didn't end up going.
Oh, like an actual Ford v Ferrari, like just another take on that same story?
Basically, yes.
So it's the deep impact to Ford v Ferrari's Armageddon?
Yes, based on A.J. Bain's book, Go Like Hell, Ford, Ferrari, and the Battle for Speed and Glory at Le Mans.
Wow. I love Ford v Ferrari, and I would totally have watched someone else's movie about that.
I say all this to say, my guess is that Kosinski goes through 3 sort of like development things that don't go. And he's probably like, I would just want to get myself onto a movie that I know will go, that's lower budgeted, that is already, scripted and ready to go. And I can hop on and just, we can hit the ground running. Basically that's not knowing that's what it feels like to me. It also feels like to me, the studio's like, we know this guy has helmed 2 huge movies, big productions with big actors. And we want we know that he'll be able to handle this thing now. It's kind of like going the opposite of what it used to be, which is like, you do Only the Brave first and then you do Tron. Like this, we're now in this world where it goes backwards, right? Where people do small movies until they have no other choice basically than to do a small movie. Yeah. So you mentioned the talent. I mean, we obviously the other 2 movies we talked about, they kind of had like either Kosinski on them or sort of like, I don't know, writers who never did anything else or mostly did TV. Who was working on this one?
This like his murderer's row of, writers and the cinematographer's Claudio Miranda, Oscar winner for Life of Pi. Incredible looking movie. Really like that one a lot. Screenplay is by Eric Warren Singer, worked on American Hustle. And
The International I'm seeing here.
Yeah. Which I like. I've always wanted to see that movie. That one's been kind of like on my radar for a long time also, and I never got around to it. That movie doesn't exist.
That movie doesn't exist.
That movie doesn't exist?
No, it's one of that morass of movies that's like, they're dead now, right? This like adult sort of thriller.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant that movie doesn't exist for you. Like it burned you somehow.
No. When I say movie doesn't exist, usually it means it's just a movie that has come out, probably made a little bit of money, but no one remembers that it exists, basically.
Right, sure.
Like Only the Brave kind of doesn't exist. That's because no one saw it.
Right.
But for this movie, it's like something like, it made $70 million, but no one remembers that even happened. So that's kind of like what that movie kind of falls into for me.
Yeah, sorry. The other writer, Ken Nolan, who wrote Black Hawk Down, obviously another film, similar genre, true story based on an article that ended up being. I really like that movie. You're a Black Hawk Down fan.
It's a great movie. I haven't seen it in a long time.
It's been a while for me too, but I remember being really impressed with that one. So you've got that kind of talent just going into it on the behind the camera side, and then in front of the camera. This cast is ridiculous. Like, I think when we had that first conversation, you were telling me it was this movie. It's like, how do I not know anything about this movie? So it's top lined by Josh Brolin, who is fantastic in it, and I just sort of like in almost anything. Miles Teller, as we mentioned. Jeff Bridges, who doesn't have a huge role in this, but I think adds a lot to it with what he has.
Jennifer Connelly. You it was gonna be difficult. He doesn't open his mouth fully the entire movie.
No. Even when he's singing, there's he gets to perform some music in this movie, which is fantastic and like one of my favorite scenes. I'll watch Jennifer Connelly in anything. She is a fantastic actress who I've been madly in love with since I saw The Rocketeer in '91, which I think is a pretty common thing. Andie MacDowell's in like 30 seconds of this movie. It's barely a speaking part, but she's a pretty big name as well. Taylor Kitsch. It's just like, it's this movie that should have been so much more than it was. And I think all of these things going into it, I don't understand. And it is, again, it's the kind of movie that they don't make anymore, right? Like it's a true story, as we said. It's a tragedy. It's a very sort of rah-rah, like the American system kind of works movie. I mean, I don't know. I guess there's, I don't know. I feel
so
like
that's part of my thing with this movie, which I feel like, again,
too sincere, too
it's not that too sincere. I don't mind sincerity. My thing is like, I feel like the movie sort of wants to like talk about structural issues in, let's say, the American Southwest or the non-urban areas of the country with like the opioid stuff with Miles Teller. It wants to kind of do that, but also wants to be like, but also this is like an old fashioned, like American folk tale about these amazing people who like are just pure heroes and pure gold. And like this job that's pure gold, so like that. And
I think it's very successful with the second thing, maybe not so much with the first. It just like ironically, so reading a little bit, I didn't know, I'm sure I heard about this story when it happened, in real life in 2013, and knowing that this movie was what it was, and it is about this team where 19 of 20 of them were killed in this fire, knowing that that's what the movie was going to be, immediately what came to my mind was The Perfect Storm, which is another movie that I think is just fantastic. I know I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen it. But
Nick, when's the last time you watched A Perfect Storm?
You know what? I'm a New Englander, lifelong New Englander. I love nautical stuff. I've been to Gloucester a bunch of times. I really, really like that movie. It's a sentimental favorite for me. I saw it twice in the theaters. I've seen it many, many times since then. Another movie with a stacked, wonderful cast and, this sort of blue collar heroism thing. It's a genre. It's an idea that kind of works for me. And that movie I actually didn't know. Like the first time I saw The Perfect Storm, I knew nothing about the true story. So when these A-list Hollywood actors on this boat all died at the end of that, and that's what actually happened in real life too, that was one of those things that just, I remember being in that theater and like literal just jaw on the floor kind of moment. Like I was just speechless when that movie ended the first time. And I don't know. It's something that works for me. I do that sort of like regular Joe's going out up against like incredible odds, and we've talked a lot, Brian and I, our mutual friend Brian, and maybe you feel this way too. Movies about competent professionals doing a good job and working together and not just bickering constantly, but actually putting their skills to the test and succeeding. That's something that I really like in movies. I like movies about good people doing good, and this is one of those movies. And I think it like on that count, it's so successful. It's so well done. It really, I don't know, particularly based on like compared to things that I've been seeing lately and compared to what's been made lately. I really feel like there's heart in this movie that you don't get out of a lot of things.
There is. I mean, and this used to be a very common pipeline, right?
Yeah.
An article or true story or book that's a true story that kind of captures sort of some amount of imagination, becomes a movie and does very well. That was it's much like the bestseller to, movie pipeline used to be so flush, and now it barely exists anymore.
And for a few years, you had a ton of these, right? Lone Survivor and Deepwater Horizon.
Peter Berg was really holding it down.
Peter Berg was your guy, yeah. I am
Patriots
so surprised.
Day.
Peter Berg, how did he not make this movie?
It's true, absolutely. They're like, Mark Wahlberg can't be in it. Well, he's like, well, then I'm out. I can't.
Yeah. Maybe that's it. Mark Wahlberg would have been fine in this movie.
Mark Wahlberg could have maybe played the James Badgedale character.
Yeah. Oh, I like James Badgedale,
I love
too.
James Badgedale. And this is the thing, like, this is a movie full of character actors, right? Even Brolin's a character actor. Brolin has led many movies, but he is not what I would call, like, an A-list movie star, right? He's not someone who could open a movie, shown, obviously, by this movie.
And Jonah Hex, yeah.
Yeah, he's not that guy. They tried to make him that guy for a while, and they realized it wasn't going to work. But in this type of role, he's perfect for it. Right. He's the biggest of these character actors. I mean, Bridge is obviously historically amazing and famous and big draw, but he's a very little part of this movie. Of the major parts of this movie, he is the main draw. And I think he's quite good in it. This is what I'll say. I think the scenes where they're firefighting and putting together the plans and talking about their like process, I think are when the movie has a motor and is really working. I also think I'm very hot and cold on Miles Teller because I think sometimes he just gets a little out of hand with the way he acts. And there is a story, I don't remember what it was. Somebody basically was like, when he was going to be in something, sat him down and was like, this is your last chance, man. You gotta be like, act like a human being in this movie, or you're not going to get another chance to be in a big movie. And that's what Top Gun Maverick happened. They were like, you got to just take away all the stuff, like all like the quirks and the weirdness. Like you got to take it away. And obviously we'll talk about that movie next time. But in this movie, it wasn't until he showed up where the movie really started to gain a motor for me. I think his performance throughout the movie is the best thing about the movie. His character story and arc, I think, is the one character story and arc that is really examined and fully fleshed out throughout the entire movie.
I really like. I thought you were going to be like, and this was not a movie where he restrained himself, and like he is. There's a visceral quality to his acting in a lot of things that I do agree can sometimes be a little bit much.
Why did he dye his eyebrows blonde? He didn't need to do that.
It certainly didn't look good.
No, he looked insane.
He did, yeah. Like, I don't know. I guess he thought that was maybe the actual guy did that. I don't know.
Maybe, but the actual guy is in interviews, and even if his eyebrows are like that, I didn't notice because he just looks right on his face. It does not look right on Miles Teller's face.
Well, anyway, I think he's very good in this. I wouldn't say it's the only thing in the movie that works for me. I thought the Josh Brolin and Jennifer Connelly stuff it's a thing that we've seen before, right? Like it's the husband who has this job where any day that he goes out, he could die, and his wife learns to live with that or tells herself that she can live with that. And we've seen that 1,000 times before in cop movies and, war movies and those kinds of things. I feel like because the script does some things particularly well, and because both of them are just phenomenal actors and they are a little bit older and there's like a maturity about both of them, I think that stuff works so well. I mean, I was pretty moved by this one, Bobby. I'll flat out say.
I think that's great. I vehemently disagree with you about the Josh Brolin, Jennifer Connelly stuff, but
really?
We'll get into it. Yeah.
Okay, so the marital story at the center of this doesn't work for you.
No, not at all. But we'll talk about it.
Because the movie opens with that, right? Like it
does.
I mean, it's mostly his character. It opens on a dream sequence, and then we move into it's like them kind of reconciling after fighting the night before. Like that marriage felt very realistic to me, and they just something about the way this movie's written and the way they perform these characters. They feel like people who have known each other for a long time and really kind of understand each other in a way that I don't know. I don't often see in movies, and it worked for me.
I think Brolin and Connelly are both fantastic actors, and I think they're both very good in this movie. I think, again, some of this is at a script level, which is the issue, but it does a couple of things that I think undercut itself. One of which is that because Josh Brolin is like the head of this firefighting team, and he's got to be the best firefighter, and he's got to be like magnanimous, and he's got to be great with the people who he works for. They got to love him. and he's got to be wise, and he always has the right answer, right, when it comes to what to do with the firefighting. He just has this very put together nature to him, and they don't ever show him with the cracks that they tell you he has. So that's one of the things that bothers me, and I think doesn't work in the marriage scenes, because they have a lot of fights about she wants a family now, doesn't want him going out anymore, all of this kind of stuff that they're seeding throughout the movie. And there's that big scene where he blows up at Miles Teller when Miles Teller is like, I'm going to leave the Hotshots or whatever. And he's like, you're a piss ant or whatever, whatever he calls them. And I'm like, this has not been seeded, like that he has this like vibe to him or whatever. But more than that, back to the Connelly thing, is they do a thing with Jennifer Connelly's character, which I hate, which is they make her the person who's trying to stop the movie from happening. Right? They do this so much with female characters, with wife characters, with girlfriends, with whoever in the movie you're watching. This is a movie about firefighters. They're going to go firefighting. There's no question they're going to go out and they're going to fight fires. But they have to have this character who's like, I know you've been firefighting for 27 years and I've been fine with it, but now I hate you and I hate it. If you go out there, I'm going to be furious with you, and we need to change our whole lives in this one conversation. And it's like Jennifer Connelly deserves more than being the character who has to be the stick in the mud.
See, I don't see her that way. Again, we're so far into this movie and we haven't really started our discussion of this movie.
But it's mostly a movie about these relationships, because the movie, the plot of the movie is they fight the first fire. You set up the fact that they're like this subgroup of firefighters, right? That they're not hotshots, so they don't get to fight the fire at the line. They kind of have to do kind of clean up. So their whole mission is to get to be this next tier of firefighters, right? And we can go through
it's almost, a very, very different kind of movie, but it has almost a Full Metal Jacket kind of structure about it, where it's kind of the lead up, it's the training, it's everything up until when they become hotshots, and then the second half of the movie is basically when they are, and like kind of their exploits there, and the accumulation of the danger of being that close, because it is, it's the difference between the guys who actually engage the fire and the ones who are kind of, they call themselves that in the beginning, like the mop-up crew. And it actually does a great job. Like, I don't know anything about this stuff, right? And I was going to read the GQ article before we talked tonight, and I was like, if I do that, like, I'm going to start confusing what I saw there and what I saw in the movie, and I don't necessarily want to, I'm going to read it after we finish talking. But I thought it did a good job of kind of just delineating what those things are and what the difference is and why you would want to be, it's a much tougher job, obviously. And it's not like, I think one of the other things that's interesting about this film, and actually the true story, because they're basically seasonal workers, they don't get the same compensation. Like, it's not like you become a hotshot and you get paid like ridiculous sums of money to put yourself in a great deal more danger. And you kind of do it just because this is what you do, and you love Only the Brave, which I guess makes it an okay title. But I don't know, going back to those characters, like the idea that they are older, I think, and I don't know how old they're supposed to be, and that's another thing that I didn't really look into, at the actual ages of these people who are real people.
Yeah, I think they're kind of playing like mid-40s. Like that's how it feels.
Like, if she wants to have children, it's going to be biologically difficult for her at that point. And I don't know, like both of their characters, and it's kind of alluded to, and it's not really spelled out, but they've got kind of a past with something like addiction, particularly like even her. So they sort of found each other, and it was working for a long time. Like, we overcame our addiction. We both found careers where we could really throw ourselves into. She's like a horse trainer.
She talks to horses. He fights fires.
She's a horse whisperer. He's a fire whisperer. They're both very good. They're just both such like authoritative people. I don't know. Whatever they're talking about, you kind of just believe them. They just have this commanding sort of presence, both of them, her too. I could sort of see someone at that point in their life when they know it's probably almost too late to start a family, and like the risks that they're putting themselves into. Like, I could see that kind of happening all at once. Like, you kind of deceive yourself for a very long time, or just kind of sweep it under the rug for a while, and then it just sort of hits you that maybe this is because
none of this is in the movie, though. You're bringing
it's alluded to. Where would I have gotten it from then?
Because you're bringing you're very true to life analysis of actual people who are a certain age needing to progress or not progress. Absolutely. But in the reality of this movie, I just don't feel like they do those things because, again, the movie is trying to do two things at once, especially in that opening. It's supposed to show here is stable guy, with stable wife versus Miles Teller, right? Because Miles Teller is the other sort of male lead of this movie. And they're sort of like inverses of each other, right? Like Miles Teller is sort of like Josh Brolin 20 years ago or whatever. And Brolin is like
opening the movie on a scene where they are reconciling after fighting the night before.
But what are they fighting about? Like it's
probably what we were just talking about. I don't know. Like I understood from the beginning, he's a flawed guy. It's
shortcut shit to me. It's short. And again, I think I would have been more accepting of it if we didn't have Jennifer Connelly having to do the same scenes that 5,000 women have had to do in 5,000 movies where they date a man or married to a man who has a dangerous job. It's like, the scene where they go to the folksiest couple in the history of the Earth's house, Andie MacDowell and Jeff Bridges. And they're like doing dishes or whatever. And Andie MacDowell's like, it never gets any easier, darling, or, whatever she does the thing.
Poor Andie MacDowell. That's like her only line in the movie, and it's such a cliche.
I know.
Again, I'm not saying this is a perfect movie.
But these are my problems. So this is the thing where I think that where the movie isn't higher for me, because there was a period about like when they were going through the situation where they go from, so they do this first fire, and basically you learn the central problem, which we talked about. And then at that same moment, right, we've got like a couple people left the crew, right? So they need new people to join the crew because they're going to be tested to be hotshots, right? They're going to go through this test. It's this unique thing because they started this. It's not like a state level organization. Apparently, are like what most of these like hotshot groups are.
Right,
like
and that's where the guys who left the crew went, right, to step up to, because. And like, this was the thing that wasn't explained particularly well, right? Like, hotshots go anywhere, although it seems like this group only is in like this, like every fire they fight in this movie is very close to Prescott, Arizona, which is where they're based. There's a couple times
where they go somewhere else where he's like, we got to go to Montana or wherever they go at one point.
Well, he talks about that, yeah, but it seems like most of the fires, at least what we see in the movie, it's all pretty close to home. And I think there's a reason for that, just sort of a thematic reason for that.
And the movie's trying to make it personal, which that's totally fine. That totally works to me. It's like, and again, this is just the way the movie was structured. I expected the final fire to kind of be like, we're stopping it from getting to our town. Like, basically, you know what I mean? Like, that's what I thought the final fire was going to be.
Sure, it certainly isn't building up, but again, much like The Perfect Storm, right? I mean, they sort of build up the stakes there where, like, this expedition that they're on to, the Flemish Cap, I think it was. It's been a while since I've seen that movie, but I think it was wherever that is. There's a sense that they're going to lose the business. They're going to lose their boat if they don't like go and pick up this huge haul, and like, if they're not very successful there. It's not exactly that for this movie. I thought it was going to be something more like that. Yeah. Where really what happened to these guys, and it is a pretty tragic story. It's like the weather shifted in a direction that they couldn't have possibly foreseen, and they did everything right. They did everything by the book, and their equipment was just not up to being able to save them in this situation. And it wasn't their fault, right? Like, nobody fucked up here. It was just...
No, which I like. And again, we'll get to that when we get to the end, because I think I want to talk a lot about like the ending and how it's executed. But that whole section, right, where from that point, from that first fire, we kind of meet Miles Teller, applies to be this firefighter, and then we get like kind of training into, we're going to go test for being a hotshot or whatever. That whole block, I was like, okay, I'm in. Like, I'm jazzed about this. It's sort of like a process movie. It's people who are good at their jobs, doing them well. It's got some nice, like, bonding stuff with the guys.
Like basic training stuff. I love, there's a great moment early on. I believe it's the first time they all go out on a run together, and Miles Teller's character, who's just out of jail, he's like, the whole impetus for him is he's I guess been a kind of just a knockaround guy his entire life. He has a drug problem. He impregnates a bartender, I think she was, or a waitress or something like that.
A waitress, I believe.
So there's someone who works at a bar slash restaurant. She wants nothing to do with him. She wants the baby to have nothing to do with him. She says, yeah, it's definitely yours, but, just stay the hell out of my life, which is pretty understandable. He doesn't seem like a super responsible guy, and just kind of like walks into this interview, which I can't believe. I mean, I guess this actually happened for the real life Brendan McDonough, right? Like, you wouldn't think these guys would give him even the chance that they give him, which is basically like, yeah, you can come run with us, whatever. And then he kind of proves his toughness, although he's like lags behind them so badly that they think he's just like dead out in the desert or something like that. But in that scene, there's this great moment where Josh Brolin's character they get to the top of a ridge and they're looking out over the forest, all the wildland that they're there to protect. And he says, just take in this vista, right? Like, take a good look at this. This is the last time you're going to ever be able to appreciate this for the beauty and the splendor that it is. Because from here on out, if you're going to be a hotshot, what you're going to see is just like fuel for these horrific wildfires that you are going to be like right up against and that potentially could destroy everything around. It's the Mark Twain Two Ways of Seeing a River thing, which is one of my favorite things ever written. And, it's not directly connected to that, but I definitely, like, that's clearly the inspiration for that scene, and it's a really, really good scene. It's beautifully shot. Again, you got an Oscar-winning cinematographer here. You've got Joseph Kosinski, who's aesthetically, I'm really starting to like the looks of his movies a lot. Like, I wouldn't say I loved everything about Oblivion and Tron Legacy, but they were fascinating, beautiful movies to look at. This absolutely continues that thread of his career. And that scene worked for me really, really well, and just kind of, it gives you a sense of like why someone would do this and what this is all about. And I like those kinds of scenes, right? You don't necessarily need that scene in this movie. It doesn't really drive the plot. It doesn't really do anything to, endear us to the characters. And this is, like I said, a pretty character-driven movie, but it's just this little thing that you hold in the back of your head the entire time that is sort of nicely planted there. And, because we get these beautiful aerial, like, drone shots and stuff, these beautiful wide shots later on, and they are beautiful, but also, you're also kind of thinking, oh yeah, right, like, this beautiful landscape can be like the most deadly thing imaginable, and it's going to be, like, because this is a movie and we know that's where it's going. And I kind of like the way that all works, and it's that, for me, like, for the first time in Joseph Kosinski's career up until this point, like, that's just a really nice character scene. That's just a moment where you let a really great actor just kind of command the audience. And I think it happens a number of times in this movie.
It does. And that scene, I think, is great. And I think that scene does tell you a lot about a lot of the different members of that group, right? Like, tells you a lot about Miles Teller's character. It tells you a lot about Josh Brolin. It tells you about James Badge Dale. It tells you about Taylor Kitsch's character. You get like a lot of who each of these kind of people are. I think the movie sometimes, and I think it's because it's really trying to like honor all of these guys. I think it ends up spending a little bit of time with a lot of people. And again, I know they're real people, so they're trying to catch people to look like them. So many of them look alike. They're slightly fair-haired, like 25-year-old white guys. I don't know who some of them are.
Most of which have mustaches.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of mustaches going on. So the ones that weren't like movie stars or people I knew the way they looked right off the bat, it was tough sometimes to track them. But I think that scene's great. And I think some of this is just the movie. It's trying to do too many things, I think, at some points, where I think if it just reined it in a little bit, because we get that tantalizing bit about like, well, why is Brolin's character, like, he knows that, Teller's character is using or is a user immediately, right? So he's had experience himself, and I think that's interesting threading. It's weird because I both like and don't like that they don't really have they don't really go into it, about what exactly was going on with him, in his past. We kind of get hints at it. Throughout it, but we don't get the full thing. That's because we got to get all these scenes where Jennifer Connelly doesn't understand her man and what he has to do and why he has to do it, But again, I think Teller is so good. And I think he is very fidgety and weird, like in the beginning, but once we get into this section, he kind of lets a lot of that stuff go, because he's starting to get more like the other guys in the group, right? So that's happening.
Well, he becomes kind of the stoic, like there's a lot of another thing that I like about this movie, right? Like the camaraderie of guys in a situation like that. And like college, I certainly have never been a firefighter, I've never been in the service or anything like that, but if you're on a team with people, if you're just around like that sort of male bonding stuff, like where you're just giving each other shit about everything all the time and telling horrible jokes and saying offensive things, and there's a lot of that kind of back and forth going on, and he is the one character who doesn't really participate in it. Like they give him a lot of shit, and they really sort of, particularly at first, they don't like him. They're pretty resistant to having this former drug addict who, they don't know that he's going to stay clean, and a lot of people don't, right? And I think there's a reason for the way they treat him the way he does. But what ends up happening is, like, I feel like I've known people like that character before he joins this group, and I've known people who are like that character after he joins the group, right? Where he is just so fully dedicated to the job and to this child. There's this great, and it's beautifully done with no dialogue. He just starts, there's a scene of him, it's after that run where he's just like dead on his feet, and he goes to the grocery store, and you think he's just buying like, Gatorade or something like that, and you don't really see it, and then he just leaves a bag full of diapers and groceries, stuff for the baby, on the door of the baby's mother, who like won't even speak to him, won't even like look at him face to face. And this just becomes like a recurring scene that we see a couple of times before she actually lets him in, which is a really nice moment. Again, it's kind of soap opera stuff, I guess. It's pretty melodramatic, but yeah, I think a lot of it works.
This worked for me because, again, I think it's very earned. We see a progression of both him and the way that she's reacting to what he does when he drops off. There's like 3 scenes, one in which you get nothing with her, a second one where she kind of like is observing him do it, and a third one where she actually comes out, right? You're also seeing Teller develop, right? So you're like, no, she should be giving him another chance because he really is trying. And I think the movie and Teller do such a great job in this section, because I'm in his corner 1,000%. And I think that's why this portion of the movie, especially, I am like cooking with at this point.
For Miles Teller too, like when we see him before all this, right? When he is just this drug addict guy and this really sort of sketchy character, he's just kind of like stumbling around through life. We see him like laying on the couch, kind of being a nothing person. And I think he really makes that believable as well. And so the contrast to what we see later, where he becomes a sort of dedicated firefighter, dedicated family man, it really, really starkly contrasts. And I think he does it's handled pretty well. I do like that stuff a lot too.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent performance across the board. Even because he's asked to do a lot of intense emotional stuff, especially at the end. And I think he does it. He pulls it off. It's big, it's melodramatic, but I think he pulls it off. I think he matches the energy of the movie, and he's not out of sync with the energy of the movie, which is the only time that melodrama doesn't work for me, is when either the movie or the person is they're out of sync with each other. And this, he's in sync. He rises and falls where it needs to be with the movie.
I agree with that. There is one scene that I really don't like that doesn't work for me at all. It's about midway through the movie where, because the other relationship is between him and Taylor Kitsch's character, who just hates him at first.
We're so funny. We're going to disagree about so much about this movie, because I think I know what you're going to say, but go ahead.
Okay, so they are like Taylor Kitsch's character, Christopher Mackenzie, who's again a real member of this team. I guess the two of them like went to high school together and had some history, and he kind of knew that Brendan McDonough was the messed up guy that he was.
They took an EMT class together. He said they dropped out of an EMT class.
Okay, yeah. and yeah, he's sort of like they're townies. It's a small town, so everybody kind of knows everybody, and he's just seen this guy around. He can't believe that he'd have the audacity to even walk into the headquarters of this elite firefighting unit that he's worked his entire life to be part of. So they hate each other, and there's this nice little sort of thing that happens between them where he's the one who disrespects Mackenzie is the one who disrespects McDonough the most. Donut, he calls him McDonut, that becomes his name, Donut. And then like through the course of him going through this training and this team starting to work together to actually become hotshots, the two of them end up becoming really close. And then when Mackenzie's girlfriend cheats on him and kicks him out of the house, he says, well, I got a spare room to come live with me. So they become roommates. And then the baby comes over to spend her first night with her father, McDonough's baby. And there's this real sitcom moment where the baby has a fever and they don't know what to do. And he's afraid to take her to the hospital because I guess then he thinks the mother's going to think he's irresponsible and, probably get the baby to the hospital. But they end up bringing him to like another one of the hotshots' wives, who I guess is a medical professional or something.
They come to his place, I believe.
That's what it is, right? So he draws on the wisdom of the group, and I don't know, it's this like sitcom scene to do something that, like, I feel like I already got the point of all of these things, and I get what he's trying to do, and I get that the two of them now, they're this like odd couple buddy pairing that I really liked a lot, and I think the two of them, like, Taylor Kitsch is great in this too, and I like the moments where there's still just a little bit of tension between them, but also they're starting to become like really close bonded brothers, friends, and that scene just stopped the movie dead for me. I was like, this is, I don't know, felt very sitcom-y.
See, this is the kind of scene where I don't mind when the movie stops dead because it's fun to me and it's like sort of light and character-y.
See, I didn't want that kind of fun in this. Like, I think some of the firefighting stuff is fun. Some of the, like,
you need a little levity
on the job
sometimes.
stuff. No, but like some of it is, it's just, as I said, it's like being on any other kind of team where you try to make the most of a tough situation, a long work day, the breaks that you take and the jokes that you tell. And like, that's all the fun and levity I need in this movie. I didn't need this scene at all.
I would take 100 of these scenes over sad Jennifer Connelly, Josh Brolin arguing scenes. Because like I feel like I'm learning more about these people in these moments than I learn from those scenes. Because like here we get to see like Kitsch's reaction to all of it, I think, is really informative about a character who has been sort of an antagonist up until now, right? He's been sort of for the first 45 minutes of the movie, he's kind of like, quote unquote, the villain. He's so mean to him. He's tries to like get him kicked out of the group, and Donut saves his life basically, or pushes him out of the way when there's like a burning tree that's about to fall on him. And he's like kind of impressed. I mean, I love that we're kind of like, okay, here's a couple months later. These guys are like thick as thieves. And like Taylor Kitsch is just as excited for that baby to be there as Miles Teller's character
and to me, that's all you need there. Yeah, I liked that moment where the baby just, and like, this character, we see him as kind of like a womanizer and, a guy who is not a fatherly type, and yet he has this like affection for the baby, and I really, really like that. And like, that's all I need. End the scene, move on to the next scene. Give me more James Brolin and Jennifer Connelly staring moodily at each other, lighting a fire out in the middle of nowhere, and like before the sun sets. But it's a beautiful looking scene, and
it is. Well, I will say that their scenes together, what I really liked, what Kosinski tended to do with their dialogue scenes, was Gone was like the super clean lighting stuff and setup stuff that usually did, and there was a lot of like natural or like in camera light, like either a fire or candles,
silhouetted,
or windows. Like that first dialogue scene in the morning is just all window light, and I really liked that stuff a lot. I like that there was a separation between what like the firefighting stuff looked and felt like, and what the personal stuff looked and felt like. I will say part of the reason I loved that scene is that really felt like Tim Riggins, Taylor Kitsch, like Friday Night Lights, like Taylor Kitsch to me, like in those moments. And it was like nice to see like that charm come out of him in the movie, because the first half of the movie, he's so uncharming. And then what it does also is it brings in the other couple of firefighters, right? To be like, okay, this is like, they have lives, they have wives, they have like kids, like, that's why that scene kind of brings them into a situation where it's not about firefighting at all. It's not about dramatic dynamics at all. It's just about a couple of people like being there for each other. And I liked that sort of like communal feeling that scene brought. Plus, I like a little change up, in the middle of a movie to kind of bridge us from one thing to another. Because after this scene, it's basically just everything starts going downhill, personal life wise for everybody. And then also professionally, in many ways. Is
that before or after the bar scene where Jeff Bridges sings?
That's before.
Okay,
that's before.
To me, the camaraderie stuff and the brotherhoods, there's a lot of that in those scenes too. Like that bar scene where they're celebrating they save a tree that's like a kind of a local landmark, and they, it's it's a great scene. Really, that's the one where I think it shows you a lot about the job. Like, I think what's interesting about this movie, sorry, little tangent here also, like, again, I'm going into this knowing very little about it. It has the title that it has. I looked at the poster. These guys are not firefighters in the traditional sense where they're like holding up, there's not spraying water on stuff, right? Like, it's about kind of burning off areas strategically so that the fire can't get across those areas. They dig trenches. Like, it's a lot of that stuff. So
they fight fire with fire is what
they fight fire with fire, and by digging holes, by moving dirt around, which is maybe not the most exciting thing, but is really interesting, right? Again, competent professionals doing something that you're not sort of used to seeing. I mean, again, not to keep bringing up the perfect storm, but like, I didn't know much about that world, right? Like commercial fishing and like just what the day-to-day or minute-to-minute of that job is. And so when things happen, there's a moment in that movie that like I can't even watch it, where I think it's John Hawkes' character, or maybe Mark Wahlberg's, gets like a giant fish hook like right through his hand. The rope gets loose or something, and it's like the dangers of a job like that. Like, you don't understand what they would be. I mean, you think of firefighting, and Backdraft is kind of the firefighter movie, right? But that's a very sort of traditional.
Apparently, they're called structure firefighters. Apparently,
which I never really knew the difference, right? And that's Miles Teller's character too, right? He's like, I think I want to go over to the structure side, which, when I think firefighters, that's what I think, right? In a movie like Oliver Stone's World Trade Center, that's about those guys. This is about something kind of completely different from that. And, there's so much digging and hoeing and pickaxing in this movie where it's like, all right, never really seen that in a movie before.
Again, I liked that bar scene.
Oh, right. We were talking about the bar scenes. I love it. I love that, saving the tree I thought was great. And a great... the way those scenes kind of play back to back also, right? Like, we see the job kind of like, that's the most specific. Like, the one thing about the firefighting scenes is you don't get a really good sense of exactly what the plan is, and I love that in a movie, right? Where it kind of lays out like, here is where we're going, here is the goal, here is what happens if it goes wrong. It does that a little bit for the Yarnell Hill Fire at the end that ends up being the end of most of these guys. But that scene kind of pretty clearly lets us know exactly what needs to happen, what they're trying to do. They're saving this tree that's on like a few square feet of land, and they basically have to destroy everything around it to save it. There's a wonderful overhead shot of the aftermath of this, right? And it's just like blackened earth and then this tree. And then you get this triumphant scene at the bar where Jeff Bridges is singing and everybody's just drinking and hugging. And it's just a really nice sort of moment of, it's a triumphant heroic moment in a movie that you sort of know where it's going at this point. I mean, the tragedy sort of hangs over this movie, like just from the very beginning. And this one, unlike The Perfect Storm, I went into it knowing exactly how the real life story played out. And one of the first things we see after that argument scene or reconciliation scene we talked about is James Badge Dale's character, and he's got a little son and brings out his teddy bear, and he's like, bring him on your firefighting trip with you, and like stuff like that. Really, like, if you know anything about this story, right, like those scenes, like, oh man, that kid's not going to have his father by the end of this movie. And I think that it's a note that's sort of playing in the background, but it's not like the main thing. But the entire time, like, this is something that's going to collapse, and it's going to be a tragic ending. And I don't know, like, maybe that makes this movie more emotionally weighty sort of throughout the entire thing. Did you get that sense? Or
yeah, my thing is like, I didn't actually know exactly what was going to happen at the end. I didn't know that, like, most of them, almost all of them, were going to die. I figured that there was going to be some kind of big tragedy in it, obviously, because you don't just make a movie about, oh, they just did their job really well and everything was fine. You don't make a movie out of that. I would watch that movie too, to be clear, but Hollywood does not invest $40 million and cast these people in it to do that movie, right? So, but this is, again, one of those things where I find it difficult with a movie like this, because I'm not content letting sort of our real world knowledge of a situation lend either benefit or detriment to the movie itself and how it's structured and constructed, right?
Oh, no, I agree, right?
James Badge Dale, yes, his kid's without a kid. I care a little bit because I really like James Badge Dale, which again is a thing that movies do and deploy, and it's a completely valid thing to do. It's a little part, but you won't be able to care about it. Cast an actor people like, or is easy to like immediately, right? And James Badge Dale just has one of those faces and is able to do like convey himself in a certain way where you're like, I like this guy. He said like 18 words in the entire movie, but I like,
No, but I think it actually does a pretty good job developing that character on that sort of minimalist kind of thread. Like Jesse Steed is his name. He's basically the second in command. And, he's mostly just taking orders from Josh Brolin throughout this movie. But I actually so I saw that scene in the beginning with his son and I was like, okay, I hope the movie pays this off, right? Like you can't just go from that scene, which is like pretty naked emotional manipulation right in the opening scene. Like this movie very easily could have just gotten to the fire and gotten to this character's death, this real person's death, and you'd be sad, but it wouldn't be like resonant at all, right? I mean, it wouldn't work. But I do feel like, as I said at the beginning of this discussion, unlike the other Joseph Kosinski movies that we've seen thus far, I really do get a sense of who these characters are, and I really come to like who they are and what they do and this relationship that they have, and I think even that character, right, who is kind of minor in the grand scheme of things, we like him enough by the end of this movie where it really does hurt. Like we really do feel it when things go bad at the end.
They do a good job of giving you his character through his competency and his way with the guys, right? And I feel a loss for like Miles Teller in his death. I just don't feel really a loss for like the family part of it because I just don't feel like they've done a good enough job because there's just too many characters. I mean, this is a structure thing for the movie. It's just it wants you to care about too many people because it knows the ending. Right, it knows its ending. It wants to be super respectful, which I think is great. And you watch special features, they talk to all of the families of all these people. They like all their approval. They went and visited them, and I think that's awesome. And I think that's like very important. But I think it's the issue when you do something that's so close to when the actual event happened, and also so kind of small scale. It's not like this big world event that happened, right? So these people, there's real people who live there who are going to be affected by what you're doing, and and so then when you're making this movie, I'm sure they're like, well, we have to have, Firefighter 7 because his wife is going to watch this movie and she's going to be like, why wasn't Jimmy in the movie? Again, this is where I think some of the real world stuff, unfortunately, I think makes the movie a little less effective because I don't have time to care about everybody. And because of that, I think I care a little bit less about every single character because they try to make me care about so many people at once.
But I think it does a great job of just building characterization collectively for this group. And that's why the ending works. Because again, I hate movies. I hate to use the phrase, but like you can easily make a film tragedy porn, right? Where, the central thing is that, death and destruction and people lost their lives and families lost members and things like that. And it's so easy to do that. And I think a better movie, which I think this one is, really, you can't do, there's 20 of them altogether. There's no way you could tell every single one of their stories. And frankly, most of their stories are probably similar or not that interesting in that this could be a movie kind of thing, I think that the focus on McDonough was really interesting because he does have that arc, right? He goes from being one thing to a completely different thing. And I really, really like that. But I don't know. I mean, I think it takes real skill and it takes really solid writing, really good acting, and again, good direction to make you care about these characters in the sense that it's not just tragedy porn, right? Where we do, like I did the worst thing, which is watch this movie in 2 sittings. I watched about half of it, and then I had to stop it and finish it the next night. And it's a little bit long. It's about 2 hours, 15 minutes. And it does have that kind of like bifurcated structure, right? Like going, up to the point they become hotshots and then everything after they become hotshots. There's a 3-year time jump in the middle. It's 3 years, I think. So Yeah, so I mean, in some sense, it kind of works that way. If it's two episodes, if it's one half and then the other half, but I think I would have gotten even more out of it if I had watched it in one sitting and just kind of experienced the sort of emotional sweep of it all at once. But I don't know, like I never felt like this movie was overly manipulative. Even that scene with the teddy bear, like that was close. That's about as bad as it got, and everything after that just felt real enough and felt earnest enough to me that I don't know. I was pretty affected by it.
I think this movie is incredibly earnest. I don't think there is cynicism being put to play here in the way this movie is structured or delivered or acted or directed or anything. And I think that is one of the reasons why, even though I have a lot of gripes with the movie, it still comes out in the positive for me, because I really appreciate what the movie is trying to do at many of its sort of stops along the way. This bar scene, though, is kind of an encapsulation of, I think, my two minds about the movie, which is I feel like the camaraderie stuff I think really works. I think there's the person who's like, oh, I made out with my husband underneath that tree or whatever on our first date or whatever. All that stuff I think really works. Like, it's like, okay, yeah, we're getting the stakes. Like, this is the town. Like, this town's what's at stake here, right? These people have formed like a real friendship relationship. We got Jeff Bridges being folksy as hell, singing a song. I'm all for all of that. You know what I mean? And then we have the second half of that scene, which is the Miles Teller, Josh Brolin conversation. I understand the function of it in the movie, right? There needs to be the moment where it's like you have the no hope moment, right? This guy who has been trying so hard is like finally like, I'm doing something for the right reason, and I'm gonna take the next step. And his mentor, who he respects, is like kind of goes off on him, and like they're both sort of like in an impasse, right? Because we get him being like, I don't have it, and then he gets in the car with Jennifer Connelly, and that devolves into that other conversation. I get the function of it in the movie, right? Because it feels like it needs to be like, okay, we need something to overcome, so for when we get to the inevitable ending, the tragic ending, we feel like these characters have really grown and come somewhere, and they're finally gotten to the point where they are on the way to being their best selves, and they get like tragically cut short. The fact that I can feel that while watching the movie is the problem for me, right? Because in a great movie, you don't feel it, right? It just happens, and all of a sudden it's in your brain, it's in your heart. And in this, I can feel it trying to happen, right? And that, I think, is my main issue with this little section. This is my least favorite part of the movie, basically, is this conversation into the truck conversation that they have. That goes along with when she gets in the car accident and she's like, oh yeah, you want me to call you now when I get in a car accident? Like, and I'm like, what is this? What is this character that you've been given? That this whole like bit of the movie is my least favorite part, because it's like, we have now had two characters, both Brolin and, Connelly, who are both in their own ways trying to stop the movie from happening. And it feels to me like too obvious, on the nose structural stuff to try to make us feel something. And that's, I think, my issue with it. But I know you love them because you've talked about how much you love them. So I want to know what you're like, why you love them.
The way they interact with each other, I think the way those two characters are drawn, I just think is well done for what it is. Like, she has a point, but also he has a point. The scene with his character and Miles Teller, right? Where it's like, I got you this far, and I gave you this chance, and you've stepped up, and now you just want to turn your back on it. And are you going to go out and get yourself killed now? Or are you going to get back into drugs or something like that? I kind of like the way that scene is written too, actually, where it's like, it almost kind of dawns on him, and maybe I'm reading more into it than what's there. But it's like, oh yeah, like if I go out and do this much more conventional job, and I don't have to sort of put my ass on the line the way I'm doing it right now, maybe I will revert to my old ways or something like that. Like, I don't know, like I feel like a theme that's trying to make itself emerge in this part of the movie about who you were, who you are, who you're gonna be. And I don't know, like those because we open again with that scene of them, we fought last night, let's try not to do that again. And they both know that they're going to, right? Like they know that it's not going to be a perfect marriage, because maybe there is no such thing, but they really do love each other and really do respect each other. And I think a lot of that stuff just works. Like I think it's and it might be the acting, it might be just that the two of them are really good at what they do. They've both kind of established, as I said, this particular type of screen presence where, even Josh Brolin in No Country for Old Men, right? Like that character's kind of an asshole. Like he makes terrible decisions, but he is just such an authoritative looking person and sounding person that you kind of go along with it anyway. Like you're kind of on, was it Llewellyn?
Llewellyn, yeah. But that movie is a masterpiece.
I know, and this movie is not, but
yeah.
Again, I do think the gravitas that he brings to his characters and I don't know, I believe him so much as this character as well, and I don't know, it's there in the movie, maybe it's not there in the movie, but the idea of leadership, he's like this older guy, this sort of father figure, the rest of the team is younger, and he's in there in the shit, he's up there against the bitch right there with them, which I think is really interesting. And like what would his next step be? Well, probably like, a desk job kind of thing where he would command, he'd be doing this. He'd be the coach, right? He'd be doing this from the sidelines.
He'd be like the Jeff Bridges kind of character.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that is discussed at one point, right? Like Jeff Bridges' character was an actual firefighter at one point, and now he's just kind of moved up through the ranks. And I don't know, like that's a realistic and I think believable thing too. Like, why wouldn't she want him to do that? And like the fact that she can't understand why he wouldn't do that, I find that believable.
It's not that I don't find these concepts believable, right? Or the themes. I love the idea of the theme of like you start as one thing and you become something else. Like
you just don't think the movie's handling this as well as it could.
Exactly. I wish the movie had spent a little bit more time on the script level developing the sort of issues with their relationship. And I wish the movie was comfortable letting both of them have more warts and more issues, because like they talk about issues, but they both act like folksy saints like almost the whole time. You know what I mean? And like I kind of like that she gets in that car accident, because it's a little bit like she's being irresponsible, right? She's driving home when she doesn't need to drive home. She's not calling him. Like she's going right back to work.
Blood still on her face. She's got this like gash on her chin.
Yeah, like I like stuff like that,
Yeah.
and I just wish they had let those characters be a little more of that, but they have to serve. The problem is they're serving two roles, right? They're serving like this like personal role, and they're also having to serve as like this kind of like more symbolic role as like the sort of mother and father of this group of younger people that is like kind of below them, right? So the movie is torn with those things, so I don't think it fully commits to either of those themes.
But I think that's a failing of just movies like this in general. Not a failing necessarily, but like it's a very, very fine line, right? Like you want to be respectful to these real people. You want to tell the true story as close to the way it actually happened as it was. So, you can't make this sort of your indie relationship drama. You do kind of have to paint with broad strokes. You do have to be mindful of the real people and the families who were affected by this. Like kind of like the stuff that happened after all this, right? I mentioned it before, how, they weren't even going to get compensation for what happened to their husbands who were killed in this. That's a whole other story in and of itself that the movie just doesn't have the ability to get to. But, I think it does, at least with her character, kind of shows some complexity and some thought on the part of them as to like how they would approach this. All that, like, and again, it pays off in spades in the end, because her, during that scene in the middle school at the end where they all basically find out for certain, they get the confirmation that all of them were killed. She's just, it's like hard to watch. It's absolutely chilling.
It is. But again, that scene again, it's this bar scene where I think half of that scene is so good. And then the fact that her husband has just died, and she has to be the one who comforts Miles Teller.
Yeah.
Really bothers me. She's not a character. She's she's just like an emotional support animal that like, you know, goes around. You know, they even do this in the beginning where he takes in that like really bruised, like really cut up horse. And she's like, oh, he's doing bad. But if I nurse him long enough, he'll get right. I'm like, this is the most obvious metaphor that's ever been existed in a movie, I think. This is the thing. I just wish her character had more of her own thing. You know, all of her things just have to do with her relationship to Josh Brolin's character. And I think that's really the seed of my issue with the way that character is drawn out. Connelly is great. The Brolin thing, I just want to bring it, his screen presence is so interesting to me. If you want a middle-aged, authoritative, folksy Southern guy,
yep,
you know exactly where you're going. It's just so funny for a man who was born in like Van Nuys, California, is the son of like the opposite kind of actor to that. You know what I mean? Like one of the more like known for being like a very elite, you know, fancy dancy kind of guy, James Brolin.
Right.
Really it all comes from No Country for Old Men, right? That's where that screen presence is born, right? The Coens kind of birthed it out of him. And it feels like every other movie he does that thing, and I have no problem with it. I love it. I love when when movie actors have a certain persona that they don't deploy always, but they deploy in movies like this where they have to be the center of a movie, where the part isn't particularly showy, you know, where he just has to be the hard center of the movie. I think it's a really valuable thing, and I think it's something that people don't value enough in movies, is this sort of thing. And watching this too, I was thinking two things. One, this is the first movie of his where I can see Top Gun coming.
Oh, 100%. Like, this is the trial run for Top Gun. Absolutely.
The way it's shot, the way it's lit, the color palette, the performances, all of that stuff is being birthed here, right, in this movie to me.
The simplicity.
Yes, the simplicity of it, yes.
The pure sort of heroism, you know, we're not going to question really any of this. Like you mentioned earlier, like there's some municipal governmental stuff that maybe you could get into in this movie. And it's like, no, we're going to sidestep that. This is all about heroism. Top Gun Maverick is that, you know, to the nth degree. Yeah, like you could tell, like when they were looking for someone to direct that movie, oh, definitely get the guy who made Only the Brave.
Well, and I'm sure Tom was like, I love this guy. You know, Tom hires his directors. Like, that is basically what he does. And also, watching this, I was like, Brolin would have made Oblivion much better as the center of that movie than Cruise was in that movie. Like, that type of screen presence to me automatically takes that character into a different place for me, right? And I wouldn't have believed it, but I almost would have believed the football speech if it was coming out of Josh Brolin's mouth. You know,
yes, I think he would have handled that a lot better.
Because I believe Josh Brolin has watched a game of football in his life.
Yeah,
you know, he doesn't just take the thetans out of his blood and jump out of airplanes. But
like maybe that's what it was too. Like I believed so much of the character stuff in this movie and just the interactions and like the day-to-day stuff and like, you know, the bullshitting around on the bus and those kinds of things. Probably because Oblivion was just such a cold movie in so many ways, and like there was no realistic, genuine human behavior in that movie. So that like this movie just attempting that stuff, I was like, oh good, I've missed that.
Yeah, and I wrote down in my notes, so I was like, you know what's great? Just a couple of actors standing in a real place with a camera shooting them.
Yeah.
You know, like actors standing in a really awesome looking place. Mm-hmm. Like just
there's an incredible sense of place. Yeah, like I've always Joseph Kosinski, just the films we've talked about, right? Like the backdrops are incredible, the set designers are great, and those two movies were a lot of manufactured things. The apartment.
He tones it down in this though. There aren't as many like manicured spaces in this as there was.
No, there's not. But he shoots like real spaces almost in the same way, right? Like the majesty of the desert of Arizona is really, really beautifully communicated in this movie, and it has, even the bar and those settings and Brolin's character's house and the shack that is their headquarters is this like corrugated metal thing out in the middle of the desert.
That was the most Kosinski feeling thing to me, was that corrugated definitely. Metal firehouse.
But I liked it. I mean, it all felt somewhat real to me. And particularly there's a couple moments here where they are fighting fires and like, the big thing about fighting wildfires, right, is not so much the natural things that are burning, but there's neighborhoods, there's people living there, there's homes. They say it a couple of times, right? Like, we could have saved that neighborhood, we could have saved those homes had we, that's the opening, the first fire where, if they had listened to Brolin, it's nicely sort of portrayed in the beginning that he's the competent one and a lot of other people are not doing the right thing. But we do kind of get a sense that people actually live in these places. There are lives at stake here. And yeah, I don't know. He's always had a really good sense of place. He's always had an incredible sense of always. He's made 2 movies at this point. This is his 3rd. And all the TV commercials and the music videos and that kind of stuff as well. But like, I don't know, this one felt more to me like a movie, right? Like my big thing about Oblivion was like, this is a movie that looks like a commercial, that feels like a commercial from a guy who made his bones making commercials. Whereas this feels like a movie, and it's not a subtle movie. And it's not a complicated movie, but it feels like it's old-fashioned almost to a fault. But I kind of like that. And I kind of like that he shows that he can do that. And I think he takes it to another level with Top Gun Maverick.
He seems like, what I'm starting to learn about him, right, is he's an old-fashioned guy, it seems like. He likes, like, these sort of, like, big, old movie conventions. And, I mean, next time we're going to talk about Top Gun, which is a movie that I think is great. But I'm going to bring up probably a lot of the same gripes I have with this movie when we talk about that movie, when I talk about the stuff I don't like about it, right? Like he puts his tricks down a lot in this one, right? There are some of the scenes I thought one of the first shots of the movie, right, is Brolin like laying out all his gear.
Oh, I love it.
It's a great shot, but again, it's a Kosinski ass shot. It's
a commercial shot.
It's a commercial shot. It's like,
everything is like perfectly spaced. So there's like the same amount of space between each of these firefighting items that he's putting together.
Brolin is perfectly framed in the center, and there's nothing in the center. So it's like, it's all this stuff is, it's got like,
well, okay, so this opens with a dream sequence, which is
the fire bear,
a bear made out of flames, like barreling through the woods. Then we get that scene. We get him and his wife waking up in this, against this backdrop. There's a window there. We can see the landscape behind them. Then he's driving down the road in a pickup truck, and it's like, oh man, is this whole thing gonna look like a pickup truck commercial?
Yeah, that's exactly what I felt
thus far is like, you just throw a Chevy logo on that Dodge, because there's some very obvious Dodge product placement in this movie. I was a little worried for about a couple of minutes at the beginning. It's like, oh man, we're just kind of going back to that. And yeah, I agree. Like once this movie gets rolling, particularly with the Miles Teller character, we lose a lot of that. There's some moments later on that are a little showy, a little ostentatious. There's things that are made exciting that probably were not particularly exciting in real life, although there's some great moments in there too. There's the bit with the tree almost killing Taylor Kitsch's character. It's like, wow, it's a cool little scene. It looks cool and actually serves kind of an important role in the plot here. So I mean, it's not a subtle movie, but it's definitely the most subtle Joseph Kosinski movie I've seen thus far, and I think even more so than Top Gun.
One of the things I think is really nice is like with the Teller character, when you get to that house, it's just like a dumpy ass shitty room that he's in. Like there's nothing. It's not like a converted shipping container on the bay, or whatever. And I liked that about it. And yeah, I think even the firefighting scenes, obviously he does sometimes where he gets these big flourish shots, right? Which I think are really are impressive. But I think the fact that he holds them back and so much of the action is very close quarters, I think really works. And
like I said, a lot of it is just digging. A lot of it is just...
It is a lot of digging. But I love the idea that they actually like take those gas things and like light the fires or whatever. And there's that one scene where...
Throwing a flare into the middle of it.
Yeah, where Teller's like, my gas can is not working. He has to throw it away, and then like this huge fire breaks out. And then, Brolin saves him, and he's like, oh man. He's like, oh. And then Brolin's kind of like, that was close one, wasn't it? Like, I've done this one a million times before. And I like that scene. I really liked, because it's like, I know so much about Josh Brolin's character just from this scene. Because like Teller, maybe he messed up, maybe he did what he was supposed to do, and it caused an issue, but Brolin doesn't go off the handle. He doesn't scream at him, or whatever. Like he's much more on his ass when they're training, right? And he's like, and he's like, if you don't know these fire codes, everyone dies or whatever. That scene where he's on the
watch out. That's a great, it's a wonderful monologue. It's pretty early in the movie where, firefighters gave their lives to learn these things that, now you should not do, learn from their mistakes, or, you're disrespecting them. I really like that moment too.
Yeah. So these big things, these melodramatic, I think really work because the setting is so big and so dramatic, right? It's sort of like this idea, right? The Aaron Sorkin thing, which is like his big operatic, everything is really important dialogue really, really works when it's about like, is Russia going to invade, China, but works a lot less when it's like, how funny is this joke going to be tonight on our comedy show? So like, I think that this is too, where those big operatic moments really work here in the firefighting scenes. And they really did light a lot of fires. They're like, it was really fucking hot. And they're talking about this one scene where they're all kind of like those solo shots of each kind of character where you're like,
low angles. Silhouetted beautifully. Sure.
They're standing behind like real fire. And they were saying like, we have to stand there looking all cool, like when those shots are up, but the moment they cut, you see all these tough guys like being like, oh my God, and like running away and freaking out. So I think all that stuff works. Like the tree thing we talked about, the tree thing works so well because the stakes. There is clear stakes with a plan, right? It's like,
yes, that's what I was saying, right? Some of the other firefighting scenes, I didn't get that, but I was also, the minutia, the jargon, like the script does a great job of just kind of like, it doesn't explain things, and it kind of forces you to figure out what these things mean. And it's not like a lesser movie would be just so upfront about that, right? Like, we need to make sure the audience gets this. And there's things that they do. There's procedures and like equipment that they use where it's like, you just kind of have to go along with it, right? The movie is not going to slow down to explain to you why they're holding this particular device and what its purpose is. And, a dumber movie, a lesser movie would have done a lot of that, I feel like. And, would have missed out on just some of the, like, by the end of this, not that I don't care exactly what they're doing, but like, I'm so invested in the characters and I'm so invested in the world of this movie that I just sort of accept it. I go along with it.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I love in movies where it's like, look, this is our job. We wouldn't sit down and explain everything we're saying at every moment, right? So it's good. You're going to have to get it from like context clues, from visual storytelling, and just from how people react to how certain things are happening, right? And to give the movie credit, I do not like the scene between Teller and Brolin when he's yelling at him. The makeup scene, I think, is very well done. Like, I think, because I think it feels more to me what the movie set up true to Brolin's character, right? Where he's like, look, man, like, I yelled at you. It wasn't fucking about you. It was about me, like about my shit.
You reminded me of something. Sorry, finish your thought. But there's a scene that I missed that we need to talk about from earlier in the movie. That I think is one of the best things in the movie. And
I really liked that, right? I liked that discussion between the two of them. And I also like Brendan. Is that his name?
Brendan.
The Miles Teller character. We don't have a scene where he goes back on drugs and falls back into like a pit, because I like that his resolve and this sort of dedication to like this daughter that he wants to be a good person for is stronger than some guy who just says something mean to him one time.
And we think he's going to make it either way, like whether he stays with them or he doesn't. Like, we get the sense, yeah, absolutely.
We just want them to be okay with each other because we like these two guys. And I like that whole part of it, so I want to give them credit for that, because I think it does, work really well. So go ahead. What was the scene you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, there's a great moment. So when they are like this whole procedure of them becoming hotshots, right? Like, they're basically being tested. It's like a year's worth of, they've put years into this, and then they go out to this fire and there's an evaluator there. And this guy's job is to basically watch them do their job and see if they are good enough to be hotshots, just take this step up in the hierarchy. And so what that scene ends up being, and I love scenes like this in movies because this is the kind of person I am too. I'm very sympathetic to these characters who don't really have a good relationship with authority, which Brolin's character doesn't. And so this evaluator kind of has an idea of what they should do there. And Brolin says, no, we're going to do it my way. Like, I am experienced here. And I don't know exactly the particulars of the situation. The movie doesn't do a great job explaining it either. But he basically orders his guys to do something the evaluator thinks is crazy and stupid and irresponsible and is not the right way to go about things. And Brolin turns out to be right, but doesn't get any credit for it in the moment. And then there's this great moment of him kind of later on, like the couple of scenes after that, not where he breaks the chair in his office, although I like that too.
I like that. I like that scene only because of the payoff when Bridges brings him the new chair.
Fantastic, right? With the bow tied around it. Amazing.
And they have a great little moment together. They have very good chemistry together in
they
the
do.
movie.
I kind of want more of them. I mean, the movie can't fit more of them, but yeah, I would watch the two of those guys all day. But there's like a scene, and I don't even remember who he was talking to, but like basically, like he knows he did the right thing. I think he's actually on the phone with his wife or something like that, and he's like, I fucked up, basically. Like I know I did the right thing, but also it wasn't the right thing, and this movie's world is complex enough, and the character is complex enough where you can kind of see it either way, right? Like maybe he should have just done it by the book and done what the evaluator wanted, and and they do kind of make that point too. Like, well, what are we actually saving here, right? Like, what does the priority need to be? And it's a nice moment. Like, it just kind of makes you think a little bit. It's more complicated than the rest of this movie is, and whether this character is right. I mean, it doesn't really matter because the evaluator eventually just passes them or whatever, even though he doesn't like him. I like that moment of self-doubt. That's another thing I like in the scenes between him and his wife, because he kind of always goes back to that place where he thinks he knows the right thing and he thinks he's on the right path, but then he has to kind of go back and think, oh, maybe I'm wrong. And I don't know. I guess because I am a lot like that too, it really works for me.
I think, again, this is where I think the movie is playing two sides with him, and which is where I think some of these things don't work, which is that, obviously it's a big deal that they become hotshots, but we know from moment one they're going to become hotshots. So setting up that kind of like roadblock, and it feels like another one of those, like, we need this moment in the screenplay where you feel like they're not going to get it. And to me, it rings a little false. So I will say that.
But see, I love that that's how they got it, right? I love that they got it because he told them to do this thing that nobody wanted them to do.
I love that. And I love the tension of, like, in that scene being like, okay, did we make the right call? And then you find out, at the end of that scene, they made the right call. And we get that amazing shot in between those two things where they're like camping on the side of that hill, and you're seeing that fire burning, and that is an amazing looking shot. That's the reason you hire someone like Joseph Kosinski to make a movie like this, is you get a shot like that, right? Sure. I don't like the whole, like, well, even though we did everything exactly right, we saved whatever, they still might not qualify because I was a little mean to the evaluator. Like, that part of it to me is like a little bit, that's the falseness to me.
I read it completely differently. He was mean, but it wasn't about being mean. It was that he basically broke the rules, right? He went against regulations.
No, I don't think so. That's how
I saw that scene.
I think it was like, I think his thing is like, no, the way I handled it was the thing that is going to end up costing us.
But he made a choice that he was told not to do.
But that guy's not in charge of him, though. And he makes that, he's not. He's the evaluator. He's not the head of the crew. And that's why Brolin freaks out on him.
Right, but he's like the representative of the rules, right? Of the regulations of this job that they're doing. And
I don't see it that way. I see it like, he's there to, like, judge if they're a good crew, if they're doing the right thing, if they're effective. But he has no power over Brolin in that moment. And that's why Brolin tells him to step back. But I think he's saying, like, he gets too hot-headed. And that's kind of a reflection of that scene he has with Bridges in the middle of the kind of first third of the movie, where they're talking on that amazing, like, hill, like the hill that there's nothing around for forever. Like, this is where they chose to meet for like their chat. It looks great. I don't care. It looks great.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's one of those movie things where I'm like, I don't care if it makes no sense. It looks awesome. Like, set a dialogue scene in a cool place like that. Who cares?
Sure. It's the fire that him and Jennifer Connelly sit by in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. It just looks good. Who cares? I don't care. I don't need the logic for it. But he says, like, that's where Bridges basically said, if you didn't have such an attitude, like, you would have my job right now, is essentially what he tells him. And that's the sense I got from that scene, which was like, not that he broke the rules, because the guy says, like, if you're trying to do something flashy and showy just to try to impress me, it's not going to work. You should be doing this. We're trying to prove that Brolin has better instincts than a lot of these guys. So he deserves this post, right? He deserves to have this group be certified because he's an amazing CO or whatever.
But it's a risk, right?
Definitely a risk. Yes, it's definitely a risk.
I guess that's kind of how I read it. It's like, you could not take this risk and you'd probably still impress this guy. And
But he doesn't care about that.
He doesn't care about that. He has to do this thing that he knows is the right thing, even though there's a chance that it could go tits up for him and ruin the chances. And that moment of introspection that he has after that, where it's like, oh man, what if I did just ruin this for these guys who have put put so much trust into me, and I am their leader, and I'm the one making it. It's just, I don't know. I like that scene a lot.
I like the scene. I just don't like the aftermath of the scene, I guess. We know already they're going to be hotshots. I don't need the false hiccup. And then for me too, because I know they're hotshots, the moment where they get to be hotshots, it didn't really like fully land for me. You know, it should land for me because it's like the whole buildup of the first half of the movie is like, are we going to be able to do this? So when they get it, I should feel like happy and elated for these guys. And I just was like, oh, okay. You know, like I didn't really get me. I did like the party scene they had after that. And I do like some of the stuff in that one where, you know, Connelly is like, she kind of like goes over to Teller's character and kind of talks to him. And he's like, you guys are more alike than you know. I really liked, I pointed this out, I wrote this in my notes, when the guy opens the beer bottle with like a chainsaw or whatever.
That was awesome. Yeah.
And I was like, that's so specific. Like that,
Yep.
like that must have been somebody on set who like did that before. And that guy is one of the actual firefighters. He's like actually on that crew. And he was in the movie playing a different character. Like he knew one of the guys, so he plays one of the guys in the movie, and it was him who did that beer bottle thing. So okay. I'm like, that's why it feels so specific, because he obviously probably did it.
Yeah,
you know?
I love that moment too.
Great moment. So we get this last fire, right? And again, I think it's a really well designed and really well thought out scene. And this scene, they do go like, okay, here's what's going on. When this goes to this and this goes to this, you got to go back on this line and do this and do that. They talked about so many things that when things started happening, I was like, okay, but what does that mean for the 7 guys that are standing in the place where I need to know if they're going to live or die? You know, like that's right. Like that's kind of how I felt about it a little bit. I will say we get like the thing where the plane puts out their like guard fire or whatever that they do, which I liked. But previous to that, when that big ass fucking plane comes through and like drops the water and like destroys like buildings,
they're like hiding under trucks because they could like get swept away. Yeah, that was kind of a great moment too.
That was an awesome moment. I was like, I never thought about what it was like on the ground.
Yeah.
If this happened and you were standing there, you know? So I thought like that moment a lot.
Like as much as this movie is a tribute to the hotshots and firefighters, the people who fly those water dropping planes, they really get kind of the short end of the stick in this movie. Like they are responsible for that moment, and also, you know, what you were mentioning in the climax of the movie, right? So they are lighting this control fire and the plane just like drops the water in the wrong place. I mean, that's clearly a mistake from somewhere up the chain there, and that's
even at the beginning, right? Even that first scene, you see it take the water out of the pool or whatever.
Yeah, with this like an oblivious old guy. Yeah, like a hose
then he's
down.
like, "Oh right, yeah."
Yeah.
But then they drop the water on the fire, and that's when we get Brolin being like, "Oh, they don't even know. They're not trying to put this thing out at all, or whatever." You know, so like you get the sense that like these guys don't know what the hell they're doing. They make Teller the lookout, right? And he's got to go to the lookout, and you have that other kind of guy who's like kind of shepherding him back and forth.
From another crew, right?
From another crew.
Driving them back and forth on a golf cart, basically.
Yeah. And the interesting about this, right, is what I think is fascinating about this, and this is the function of it being a true story, right, is that this final fire doesn't have a lot of stuff for our guys to do, right?
Right.
They're mostly just watching the fire, like, change positions. And like you said, they have that moment where they're all kind of sitting there, and there's that one moment where they're like, what, are we just going to sit here, like, the whole time? Like, what's the deal here? Like, we should be out doing something. We can't just sit here. And I feel like that's the moment, right, where you kind of get this thing that, like, they do nothing wrong, really. They do leave that blacktop, like the charred area, which they probably would have been safe there if they had just stayed there and waited it out. You know, I think that's part of the point. But they said, no, we have to go and try to get to the line so we can try to save these houses. Like they're worried about it getting to this town. It's not their town. Again, we're talking about real world here, so it can't be their town.
It's same county, same like
it is, but again,
vicinity.
Like for a movie, it's much easier if it's like it's their town that they're trying to save, right? It makes it much more immediate, right? And Teller's character, he's on the lookout, and then he's separated from them, and it gets more separate from them, and like he has to go back with this other guy, and the other guy kind of takes him back to base camp, basically, because that's their orders, is to leave. And he can't get back to his guys because he's cut off by the fire, right?
And he's just sitting there listening to what's happening to them on the radio the entire time, which is pretty devastating in and of itself.
The thing I wish about this sort of end of the movie, and again, it's not this kind of movie, so I will say that I don't ding the movie for this, but this idea that like they did everything right, and just like the change of the wind is the difference between life and death for what they're doing, and it's sort of random, and it's so tragic that it's just so random, right? There's no meaning to it because it's not like they died, digging that trench that was going to save the county or whatever. I wish the movie had been a little bit more poignant about like that fact. But I mean, that scene is harrowing. They do a good job of setting it up early where they do the test where like, they get in the shelters, you get in those bags, you dig a hole with your face, as long as you can breathe, you're fine. I like that they don't make it gruesome. I like that you don't like, the last time you see them, they're alive, right?
Oh, I wouldn't have been able to handle that. It was bad enough. So they, and we haven't talked about the shelters, which I guess is a real thing, but it's basically a blanket, like a sheet that kind of forms like a cocoon almost. You have to deploy it, and that's the big thing, right? Like, someone tells you deploy, and that's what you do. You kind of get under this thing, like you said, like press your face into the ground. If you can breathe, you're alive. I did a little bit of reading about those after this film, because how could you not? But like, there's this moment. It's a very sort of war movie moment. It's the guys in the foxhole, whatever. And like, I don't even remember it. Like, I'm not sure if the movie's even specific about it, right? Like, it's not a character we know. I think we might see Taylor Kitsch's character there, Mackenzie, for like a moment. But like, when one of them just kind of like opens up his shelter to talk to the guy that's next to him, a couple feet away in his, and I was like, I can't take too much of this. Please don't give me too much more of this. And they don't, but man, it's absolutely devastating. I didn't realize, like, I thought those things were much more powerful than they are, those shelters. Apparently they can withstand about 300 degrees of heat, and supposedly this fire was like upwards of 1,000. So they literally never had a chance. And I don't know that the movie really communicates that, and maybe it's not important, but it was something I saw later on, and I don't know, it just kind of made the whole thing even sadder for me. But just that, like, those last couple of moments there where how things are going down, and then a lot of that scene is as we were saying, it's McDonough in the van, just like completely powerless, listening to this entire thing and kind of knowing exactly the way it's going to go. And it's the survivor's guilt thing, right? And he, like, that's eventually what Amanda Marsh, Jennifer Connelly's character, kind of tells him, like, you can't feel guilty because you weren't there. You did what you were supposed to do, and so did they.
These guys dying in this moment wasn't because of anything they did wrong, right? Because they've set up throughout the movie that they're like the best at getting in these shelters quick and the right way, right? But the moment I think and of course, if you already know, but if you don't know, the moment you're kind of like, what, something bad's going to happen, is when, Marsh is like, says to James Badge Dale's character, like, you get under, you two now. And that's never been a thing that has happened before. Right. He's always the one watching everybody get in and like, and waiting it out, and he's like, no, you got to get in now. Yeah. And then we get the scene, right, of they're driving back and they're like, okay, everyone's got to go to this school because they haven't really confirmed who's dead and who's alive because there's just so much going on. It's so crazy, right? They can't identify all the bodies at the moment because they're just charred beyond, belief or whatever. And that scene where they're driving in the car, when Jeff Bridges is driving,
Jennifer Connelly is like laying in Andy McDowell's lap.
And Jeff Bridges, and I mean this completely sincerely, and like, it affected me, cries in a way I've never seen a human being cry before.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The way he's sort of like cracking, he's kind of breaking up and losing it. Like, and the way his like lips are quivering and everything. I was like, I have never seen someone on camera cry like this before.
It's a fantastic scene, and particularly Jeff Bridges. Like, he's almost comic relief in this movie up to that point. Like, Steinbrink is his character's name, and he is, he's the guy behind the desk, as I was saying before, right? Like, they're all basically working for him, and he supports the Hotshots. He's kind of not part of what they're doing, and he's Jeff Bridges. He's the Big Lebowski, and, we see him sing. He gets to perform some music in this movie. He's a good old boy. He's like, literally, you could just call that character that. And in this moment, like, it's so different from what we've seen from him in this movie up to that point that, I think, again, it's that contrast, right? It really sort of stands out there. And like, all the acting in that scene is fantastic. And the one afterward, there's this great moment also, like, I don't know that I've ever seen this, right? Like where they're in the gym there and they basically, you know, the wives and families, they've been told that there's one person who survived and they don't know who it is. And it's Brendan McDonough, it's Miles Teller. And he walks in and there's a moment where, and maybe I just made this up, but I swear it's in the movie, where like they kind of see him walk in and there's this moment where it's like, oh shit, that means my husband died, right? Like, if this guy's alive, that means the one that I love and really care about is not alive. And it's just, you know, it's a real honest moment.
It is. I wrote that down. I was like, Miles Teller walks in that room and everyone looks at him like, you?
And the movie doesn't shy away from that, right? Like, as much as this is a traditional rah-rah jingoistic movie about firefighters and heroism, there is that moment like, you know, I can't believe it's you. I'm laughing about it, but I when I saw that, I was just it was horrifying and really well done for what it was.
I completely agree with you, and I think on the way to the school, right? He's like, I want to go to the school. The guy who's driving him is like, that's not a good idea, man.
Yeah.
Like, that's a terrible idea. And as soon as Teller walks into that room, everyone looks at him. He's like, this was a terrible idea to be here. You know, and like that wail that Connelly gives is like, like you mentioned it earlier, is very impressive. And like, they're both really good in this scene when he walks outside. Again, I just don't like that she has to like comfort him. I'm like, her husband just died. Like, I know his friends just died, but like, it's not the same balance.
It would be nice. Like, you do get the scene with the two of them at the picnic earlier in the film. I mean, she's the mother of these boys, right?
She is. But again, this is a classic female archetype in a movie. The guys get to be complex and have whole lives. And her whole thing is, I got to make the guys feel better. Like, that is, you know, and so.
You're
like,
so progressive. I'm such a chauvinist.
I am. No, I'm not saying that you're a chauvinist at all. But like.
No, I get you. I totally get you.
And there are plenty of movies where they play off these tropes and sometimes I don't even notice them, right? But this one, it was so obvious to me the entire time. And this was just how it felt at the end. You know, I just felt like, okay, like Josh Brolin being like, after this fire, I'm done or whatever. I'm like, I don't need this scene.
Yeah.
I don't need this scene, man. Even if it's true, I don't need this scene. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
he's the cop who has one last case before he retires. Sure.
Yeah. I don't need it. Believe in your subject matter, believe in your actors, believe in what you have. Don't try to tell me how to feel. Let me just feel the way I'm going to feel it. Because I think that's why the Teller character is so successful, because we talked about there's so many scenes without dialogue with him, you know, and I think those work so well in those things. There's two scenes we didn't talk about, which I want to quickly go over. The snake bite thing, which I really liked. Again, it's another sitcom-y thing. I really liked it.
That worked for me, yeah. That felt pretty real.
I liked that a lot, and I liked the way like that's where you get to see like how the town, like those nurses, like how impressed they are about who they are and what they do and stuff like that. Like that's very cheesy, but it was the kind of cheesy that worked for me. And the Josh Brolin like monologue to Jeff Bridges when they're like next to that like fire pit in front of Jeff Bridges' house, when he talks about the bear, when he explains what the bear imagery is. Like, they're very good actors, and I think the monologue is pretty decent. And I liked like the metaphor, right? How he says like, I kind of feel like that bear right now, you know, or whatever.
It's a bear on fire barreling through the woods. It's the most beautiful and most terrible thing I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And then in his dreams, he interprets that as just a bear made out of fire.
A bear made out of fire, yeah.
I kind of don't feel like this movie needs that image and that metaphor.
Either.
I like the scene. I almost would do that just with the dialogue. I really don't like that this opens with the flaming bear in the dream sequence. Unnecessarily showy, and you know that might have actually been something that the actual Eric Marsh said. I don't think this movie needs it.
No, it could have just been that scene. He could have just talked about it. I think it would have been more effective without seeing like a CG fire bear in like flashes. Again, that's the kind of thing we talked about. I think talked about this a little bit in Oblivion. Feels like Joseph Kosinski seeing better movies and trying to put like that kind of thing into his movie. You know what I mean? Where it's like,
what's the movie?
You know, it's like...
What did it remind you of?
A little bit of like Blade Runner, a little bit.
the horse?
Yeah, the horse, exactly.
Yeah, I guess
You know what I mean? Like, but it's like this thing where it's supposed to be this symbolic thing, like where... Or, you know, there's a lot of movies, and necessarily dreams, but it's like, oh, you know, when like Michael Clayton like sees the horse or whatever in the field or whatever. You know, there's like these scenes where people see an animal and it like changes their perception or kind of.
And this movie already has metaphorical horses in it. So it doesn't need both. It doesn't need the horses and the bears. You pick one and you stick with one. Yep.
It's a bear on a horse. We don't need to stack them up.
Putting a hat on that. I love that.
You know, so again, good scene. Just it's like close up monologue for Brolin in that moment, and he's very good at it. It's just one of those things where I think, like you said, if that was just that scene, would have worked so much better because it would have been like a revelation.
Even if we saw the real thing, right? Like that would
have been horrifying though. I do not want to see the real thing.
What the actual bear on fire?
No, and I'm sure they probably mocked that up at some point. I'm sure they were probably like. And I'm sure no, this is too disturbing to see this bear.
Well, unfortunately, all that made me think of was the movie Dreamcatcher. Do you know Dreamcatcher, the Stephen King adaptation, where there's a scene where
butt aliens? Yes,
but the shit weasels, I think they're called.
Shit weasels, yeah.
I actually like that movie, but it's a terrible movie. But there's a moment where like all the animals are running out of the forest, and I think there is a bear, and it just I don't know, brought back some bad associations of that. Last thing you want to be thinking about when you're trying to watch this serious, earnest firefighter drama.
Yeah.
Shit weasels.
So we were saying before, this movie was a bomb. It came out in October of 2017. Its total domestic box office was $18.3 million. It placed fifth on its opening weekend, not something you want. With around $6 million. And you actually, Boo 2, A Medea Halloween, The Snowman, and Geostorm were above it.
Geostorm, yep.
So there you go.
People went to see Geostorm. They didn't go. So I want to talk about that. I know we've been kind of going for a while here and have had a lot to say about this movie, but like, who dropped the ball here? Because I feel like I mean, I'm not saying this movie would have been like what Top Gun Maverick was, right? Like, I think that was a very specific thing at a very specific time, and that movie was successful. And we'll get into all that. We got an episode coming up on it, obviously, but like, I knew nothing about this movie. Like, if I had seen a trailer for this movie, if I had been at the movies and seen the poster for it, like, before I watched it, I mentioned it to my dad. He and I, have been seeing movies together, long-standing tradition, and his taste is a little bit more limited than mine, but he really, and I'm not, like, my taste is sometimes all over the place. He likes what he likes, he likes these kind of traditional old-fashioned movies, war movies and true stories and, these heroic epic dramas. And, I was telling him about this movie. It's like, yeah, man, you should see this. It's like, oh yeah, I saw it. It was really good. Oh, okay. So you knew about it and I didn't know about it. Like, I feel like if I had known anything about this movie in 2017, I would have been like, you and I need to go see this. He's a big screen guy like I am. You see a movie like this and it's like, you want to do it in a theater. And it never was on my radar, like, ever. Like, I don't remember anything about it. So was it just a failure to promote it? I know there were some issues with the distributor, and the release schedule is supposed to come out in September. It didn't come out until October. It's just like it changed hands. There was like one of those business things where, one distributor just bought everything the other distributor had and then kind of put out their own release schedule. But like, what happened here, and why did no one care about this movie?
Obviously, yes, probably some sort of promotion is an issue, right, on a movie like this. But I also think that two things. I think studios have lost the ability or lost the knowledge of how to properly platform and promote movies like this. Talking about the ecosystem of the movie industry, and how I think fans, just as much as executives, were guilty of not realizing that some of the movies they felt were maybe superfluous were important for the development of movie stars and actors and directors, right? Where like they don't make romantic comedies anymore. So when an actress breaks out in something, she has nowhere to go except like the girlfriend in a superhero movie or something. You know what I mean? So like we've lost these pipelines, and they're trying to get them back. I think honestly that they're trying to figure it out again. But I think this movie comes right in the middle of when everything is franchise, right? Everything is, and all those franchises are at peak box office. Those are the things that are up here, and they've lost the ability to do this. They don't even make that many of these movies anymore that they don't sell to streaming services or don't put on their streaming services. So they've lost that ability. Two, I think the key that sort of like your Peter Bergs have unlocked is that the ceiling on movies like this is like $60-70 million at this point, right? So you need to make the movie for a relatively inexpensive budget, but you also need to have a movie star who can draw people in the lead role. So Josh Brolin, God love him, is not that guy, right? He's not.
Right. He is for me, but he is not for the mainstream movie-going audience.
You need a Mark Wahlberg or a Matt Damon or someone like that who people go, because even Matt Damon will try to make these movies and they won't be successful, but you need someone like that where people go like, oh, it's blah, blah, blah actor. I really like them. I've liked a lot of their movies. They've done movies like this before. Let me go see this one. I mean, like we talked about like some of those movies, right? The Mark Wahlberg, The Patriots Day, the Deepwater Horizons, those type of movies are the ones of these that do well. Like Sully, obviously a very specific story, but obviously
Tom Hanks movie.
So we've got Tom Hanks, so it's gonna make some money.
Captain Phillips.
Yeah, Captain Phillips. Even like something like Flight, which isn't a true story, but is sort of like has Denzel Washington in the lead role. So I think that's the main problem here is that as much as I love character actors, you need one movie star to kind of hold down the center of this movie to get some attention to it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I mean, for me, I saw the cast of this movie. It's like, oh man, I want to see, I watch anything with these people in it. Like, put them in whatever roles you want in whatever kind of movie, and I'm interested. But...
Or it needs to be a director who has a name that can sell it. That's the other thing too. It needs to have a director.
At this point, it doesn't. I mean, Kosinski might be at that point now.
No, nobody knows he directed Top Gun, man. I gotta tell you, no one.
Really?
No, Top Gun is Tom Cruise. Like that's what it is. The author of Top Gun is Tom Cruise. We'll talk about that when we get to that movie, obviously next time. But I think that helps him with studios a little bit because they know, like, oh, he look at this movie. He made look how much money it made.
But what if this comes out after Top Gun Maverick though, and every single one of those ads is from the director of Top Gun Maverick? This earnest firefighter drama. It makes at least twice as much what it does, right?
If it comes out after Top Gun, it comes out on Netflix or Prime Video or something. We are in a different era now, man. Like it is not that era anymore. Your movie's got to either cost like $200 million or $15 million, or you don't have any place in a movie theater right now. Like this is basically where it is. You got to be like a Sundance. You got to be an indie movie that blows up at a festival. Yeah. And then comes out. This movie was very well reviewed, right? 87% on Rotten Tomatoes. You put a lot of quotes from
Bilge Ebiri. Yeah, he called it an ugly cry for the ages. Yeah, 100%. Dude, I've always liked his stuff a lot.
He's awesome. He's on the Blank Check podcast a lot, and he's great. Roger Moore, the other critic, gave it like a 3.5 star review, but it was a very well liked movie, right?
And even that, like the lowest review I could find, it was a 4 out of 10 from Empire Online. It was very snarky. It was very short, and I don't know. I mean, I guess you could. I didn't completely disagree with it, but like, no one said this movie is a 0. No one said this is a piece of shit, and no one should see it. It's a genre that I guess was a little bit out of fashion at the time, and it doesn't have that like A-list star to sort of carry it. But I don't know. I feel like someone did this movie a disservice, or something did this movie a disservice. And it might be an audience thing, right? Like, why are we not going to see these movies anymore?
Yeah, I didn't know it existed, and I'm one of the people who probably go see it if I knew it existed.
Oh, I 100% would. I'm legitimately bummed that my dad and I didn't go out and see this on the biggest screen we could, and I think we both would have really appreciated it.
Here's the other part about it, though, which I think is the thing that I think also holds it back. For me, anyway. I think it's a good movie. I don't think it's a great movie. And for a movie like this to really succeed, it needs to be undeniable. That's the other thing about it too. It's got to be undeniable for a movie like this right now to make an impact, with this cast, with this director, with this subject matter.
That's probably true, but there's so little of this now. I guess that's kind of what I'm saying. I mean, maybe it's just me, but like, this is what I am looking for, right? Like, I grew up watching these kinds of movies, and I want to see more of these kinds of movies, and especially in 2017, right? Like, by then, I was already pretty tired of all that franchise stuff that you were talking about, and that was kind of the peak of it, and now we're seeing the other end of that, and who knows where any of that stuff is even going at this point. But like, I don't know, like, is there just not an audience for this stuff anymore? Like, it's a bigger question for another, but like,
but again, it's an ecosystem problem, for me. And I don't think it's just a thing where you can say like, well, the studios all fucked it up. The studios went the way they went because the people went the way they went first, right? People stopped going to these kind of movies, so they stopped making these kind of movies. But again, it's one thing where like, these people who run the industry aren't really interested in the health of the industry. They're just interested in making money. So there's not an idea of like, well, we need to keep making these movies so we have a great farm system for actors and directors and screenwriters, that when we want to make these big movies, we have good people to make these big movies, right? Who have interesting voices and interesting ideas. You know, like this movie came out in 2017. I'm going to look up right now. 2017 highest grossing movies. You got The Last Jedi. You've got the Beauty and the Beast live action remake, right? You've got The Fate of the Furious, Despicable Me 3, Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle, Spider-Man: Homecoming. Sorry, and now 6, 7, and 8 are all Marvel movies. Spider-Man: Homecoming, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Thor: Ragnarok, right? Wonder Woman's in the top 10. Coco, animated movie, great movie. That's a movie that made some money. You know, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man Tell No Tales, which is an unwatchable movie, and it made $794 million worldwide. So this is what I'm saying. We're in this moment right now, and we're out of this moment now. I will say this right now. We're out of this zone.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Where you can just make a movie in the franchise and it's going to make almost $1 billion. Like Aquaman made $1 billion at the box office when it came out. Aquaman 2, which I think, again, those movies have like a voice to them. James Wan's an interesting director.
Yeah.
No one cared about it, right? It made some money, but no one cared about it. Like, it makes $700 million worldwide. That was a big surprise, right? It was like, it's a horror movie. It's a Stephen King book that is beloved and famous, but that's more of the old pipeline, right? Is like big book, make it into a big movie. Lots of people will come and see it, right? You know, we got like Justice League, Logan, Transformers Last Night, Kong Skull Island, The Boss Baby. Dunkirk 19 is really one of the first like original movies we've got on this list. That's a live action movie. But that movie is part of the franchise that's called Christopher Nolan, right? Christopher Nolan is a franchise at this point. He has his own franchise. His name
is that director. Yeah. You put his name on something, people are going to go see it no matter what it is.
Yeah. War for the Planet of the Apes, The Greatest Showman, which is not a good movie, but very interesting, that is like in the top 20 highest grossing movies of the year. But like, we're not getting any of the type of movies that we're talking about, right? That you and I are talking about here. Wonder is the 29th highest grossing movie of the year, which was this movie that nobody remembers. I believe it's Julia Roberts and Owen Wilson and Jacob Tremblay.
Drama, Jacob Tremblay. I remember the trailer for that movie.
It made $132 million domestic. Like, again,
so somebody did.
Movie stars, right?
Yeah.
Movie stars. And so like I'm trying to look at what the first like adult maybe drama is on here. That's not a franchise thing. I mean, it's not an adult drama, but Get Out is a huge hit right this year, which is one of those things where you're like, okay, like every once in a while we get somebody like this, right? Who shows up and becomes somebody that can make movies and they make interesting movies and they make a lot of money. I don't know, man. Baby Driver is like kind of this, I guess, what we're talking about here. I'm stretching.
Yeah. Well, I think Wonder is probably the closest thing that you've said so far. I don't know. To me, this is endemic of a thing that like Hollywood has kind of started to shut out this audience. Like I remember I had an older family member, like, you know, a couple of years. It was right around this time, probably 2017, 2018. And they were like, someone gave them passes to, you know, go to the movies, like gift cards or whatever. And like for weeks would just like look at it, like there's nothing for me to go see here, right? Like obviously not interested in the Marvel movies, not interested in the CGI, the kids stuff and those kinds of things. And it's like, these are people who like love movies and want to go to the movies and want to see movies and, you know, were reliable and regular customers to the Hollywood thing. And they've just been kind of abandoned. And like, this is Only the Brave is a movie for those kinds of people. And it's like, what happened to them? Like, you know, is it a chicken or an egg thing, right? Like, did they just sort of disappear or I don't know. It bothers me because I really like these kinds of movies, right? And I do feel like what Hollywood is and what American movie making has always been is, you know, earnestness and spectacle and heroism and those kinds of things. And not every movie has to be that. And you know, I saw Deepwater Horizon. I remember kind of liking it, but I don't remember thinking it was a masterpiece or anything. But like, I will always go see these. And like I said, Perfect Storm, one of my favorite movies. Whether it's good or it isn't, I do think
it isn't, you know, but that's fine.
Now it's been a while. Now I'm a little worried to watch it again. But like, I don't know. I mean, it bothers me that this can't be successful and that there's just sort of no, you know, you mentioned the word like platforming. Like what? How do you, aside from putting it on a streaming service, something like which does it a disservice also because it's a big screen movie and. Like, are we just never going to get this again?
You know, stuff can happen, right? I mean, this year I think has been interesting because a lot of the big movies got shuttled away because of the writer's strike, right? So you've got a lot of smaller movies and people were screaming about like the death of the box office, you know, this year. But like a movie like Civil War made a pretty big impression. That's a difficult movie, you know, like it's not an easy, like, you know, just nice movie to watch. You know, it's not popcorn entertainment. Alex Garland is doing what he always does, you know, but he's just doing it in like a kind of a more bombastic shell. But that movie made $70 million, you know, cost very little. And like A24 is very smart about this. A24 is maybe the one company out there still that knows how to do this, right? That they're great at promoting their movies. They're great at casting. They know too. They're very smart. They're not stupid. They're like, we need to put people, you know, in the movies that cost a little bit more money, there has to be faces that people recognize in those movies, you know? But we're going to do more stuff, you know, more interesting stuff because we make it for cheaper and we can release it and it'll make enough money where it makes sense for us. And
now A24 is kind of becoming that franchise, that brand also, right? Like you see something as an A24 movie and maybe that's why you go see it, even if there's no one in it that you're interested in, or it's a genre that you're not, you know, it's not your favorite thing.
You know, people like screamed about the weak opening of, you know, the Fall Guy, the sort of like action comedy with Ryan Gosling. The studio undercut its knees and put it on streaming like a week later. Like, but it opened at like 20 something. It made it to like $92 million domestic. We are slowly but surely, for everything but like these huge movies, moving away from this. It has to make all its money in week one or it's a failure. It's never going to be the, you know, the early 90s, late 80s where it's like this movie is in its 150th week and it's made $200 million, you know, whatever. That's not going to happen anymore. But I think people are starting to realize that the streaming thing has started to eat its own tail a little bit and there's got to be something left in its wake, right? And people get very reactionary and very upset and they think everything's going to end and crash and go away. But
I was sick of reading those think pieces about the Fall Guy.
Oh my God.
Immediately when they started coming out.
Yeah. I'm like, what did you expect? Like, this isn't Iron Man. It's Ryan Gosling, who has never been a box office draw movie star. People love him. He is beloved, right? But he's never been a guy who can open a movie to $80-70 million. Neither is Emily Blunt. They're just very well-respected, well-liked actors who have been in big movies as not the lead, right? And that movie made some money, but it's a grown-up movie. People who have kids are not always going to the movie the first weekend.
Sure.
They're gonna catch it in 3 weeks when they got a time, when they miraculously have a night where they can sneak out to go see a movie that doesn't star children or animated characters. You know, so I think the industry is going to start healing itself a little bit here because it's gonna have to, because all this sort of like bubble stuff they used to inflate their shareholder value is popping, and it's what's gonna be left is we got to kind of go back to the way it used to be. You know, I mean, Anyone But You made a ton of fucking money with Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell.
Yeah,
it took weeks and weeks and weeks. But it just kept making like $5 million, $5 million, $5 million. And it set both of them up for exactly what's been missing, which is like, these people are ready to take the next step, right? They're ready to take the next step into something else.
I'm looking forward to the days when there's multiple Anyone, but like, I didn't see that movie and I don't know that I ever will, but like there was a time where there'd be that and like something in another genre that was kind of doing the same thing, right? Like it wasn't like the number one movie, wasn't the biggest thing in the world, but people were going to see it. Like, you know, the water cooler conversation, like that was the movie. Like, oh yeah, I went out on a date with my wife or my husband and we saw this movie and it was really good and you should check it out. And like, I don't know. I feel like,
where's my Ashley Judd thrillers?
They're Ashley Judd thrillers, you know, adaptations of the kind of stuff that you read on an airplane, those kinds of movies. Like, you know, not that those movies are always great, but like I miss them, you know, the legal dramas and the, you know, the like mid-budget action movies starring someone that's not like, you know, your Marvel franchise person.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you 100%. And I think, but also I think this is a function of getting older and starting to be able to sort of see that the whole of something is not just about the things you really love and get excited about fully all the time. You know what I mean? Like, you can't have the movies that, because look, I love big blockbusters. I love them. I like to see explosions and people doing crazy stuff, and I will see those movies till my dying day. But those movies can't exist and continue to exist if you don't have all the other things as well. And it can't just be horror. I love horror movies, but it can't just be $7 million horror movies and $300 million blockbusters. It can't.
But I love the theatrical movie-going experience. So when those horror movies do that stuff, like when Ty West does something and people actually go to see it, like, great. I mean, you know, I'm not even the biggest fan of that trilogy, but I'm so happy that it's making money. And like, I want that to continue. I want to see who's the next Ty West, right? Like, the movie I'm more excited about than anything, we're dating this episode, but Longlegs comes out the end of this week, and I'm totally pumped for that. And I hope it does really well. And I hope that just kind of sends a signal that like people will still go to a theater to see stuff like this.
But again, it's a horror movie. And
sure,
they fully accept people. It's a business model. Like, they know people will go see horror movies. Like, they have no doubt about that. You can they're like the best return on investment in the business. You can spend $10 million and make $50 million. You're like, all right, we're good to go. You know, the Conjuring franchise has cost like a combined like $150 million, and it's made like $1 billion.
Yeah, Paranormal Activity Talk to Me last year.
Yeah. These movies do it. A24, Blumhouse, they're great at doing this. They're so good at it. You know, and A24, let's talk about, they're going to, like, Civil War was their first blush into this, making slightly bigger movies, right? Like, and I think that's a great idea. You know, they basically like, look, we've got to start making a little bit bigger movies that are a little bit more down the center to fund all of the weird, crazy shit that we do. You know, we can't just keep making movies that make $7 million over and over again. But if we make, like, they've licensed the Death Stranding game, you know, like, but they're doing like weird blockbuster stuff. Like Civil War is a weird blockbuster. So like, that's like what I want to see. And hopefully that's development. And like, you're dating again. I shared it with you, but the F1 teaser came out, the new Kosinski movie.
Yeah.
And boy, does that look like, now that we've done a couple of these movies, I'm like,
does that look like the Uber Kosinski movie?
Yeah. A very even color palette, beautiful.
I'm very excited
shots.
to see it, though. I can't wait.
Yeah.
I want to see that on a very big screen next year.
Absolutely. So far, this is I think his best movie so far.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like we kind of did this, not that it's important. I believe we called Tron Legacy a gentleman's 6.
Yeah.
We were both somewhere in the 4 range for Oblivion. What's your take on Only the Brave?
It's like a 7 out of 10 for me. It's a solid 7, which good. Like, that is a very good movie to me, you know. Sorry, good bordering on very good. You know,
I'm right there. 7.5 to an 8 for me.
Okay. Yeah, not that far off. I mean, again, I think some of the stuff that bothered me a little bit more than you, obviously, from this conversation, but this is what I was hoping the second movie would be. Like, this would be like the step up to the second movie, and then the third movie would be there. You know what I mean? So it felt like a little bit like we started out like kind of on the level, and then we kind of dipped, and now he was kind of fighting his way back up. So I already know how I feel about the next movie, so I know that we're going to keep going up a little bit there. And then
like I said, the story does have a redemptive arc.
Yeah, but I don't know how far the crash is going to be with Spiderhead, so we'll see when we get to that point.
Well, then you got the F1 movie, so
yeah, absolutely. And we'll cover that when that movie comes out next year. We'll do a special episode.
I watched a lot more interviews with him. You said you'd been seeing a lot of Kosinski lately, and just kind of doing some research for this one. And it was all like promotional stuff. You know, it was the boilerplate Hollywood thing that every director has to do. But I don't know. I kind of like the cut of his jib. This guy, I sort of knew that. Like, he's very serious. He's very professional. But I don't know. he's not just a business person, right? Like he clearly gives a shit in a way that I like and I appreciate.
He does. He definitely does give a shit. And that's what definitely has come across to me in those interviews as well, is he cares about movie making, and he cares about, like, he does care about the characters and the story, even though sometimes I think that's the fault, that's his like main weakness, but he does really care about it. So that goes a long way for me. I will say, yeah, the other two movies, I was able to find like less corporate EPK like interviews, more like,
yeah, I mean that's literally all that exists for this one.
Yeah, actually talking to people, you know, and fans of the movies, or people that, you know, journalists and stuff like that. And those were very interesting to watch, because he gets, you know, he gets a little bit more real on those things. Like I listened to an interview with him that he did after a screening of Tron Legacy like a couple years ago. And he was like, it was right before this movie came out, because he talks about this movie at the end of it. And then it's still called Granite Mountain at that point. Because like this movie Granite Mountain coming out in like 6 months or whatever, and they must change this right near the release of the movie.
Well, yeah, because like I was saying to you, there was a clip from the premiere of this movie where he called it Granite Mountain. Like, is that a better title? Like, would that have done anything for this movie box office wise?
It's a more evocative title than Only the Brave. Only the Brave is out of that book of like, you know, it's complicated and like whatever works and like all of that. Like, here is just like a generic phrase that fits into sort of a genre.
It sounds like a movie title.
Yeah, it sounds like a movie title. Yeah.
Only the Brave sounds like, I love, one of my favorite things they did, I love Seinfeld, but this running gag where they had just like titles of fictional movies in the Seinfeld universe, because they were always going to the movies together. And it sounds like one of those movies.
Yes,
like,
absolutely.
Oh, we can catch the 8 o'clock of Only the Brave.
Yeah. It also sounds like you said, it sounds like a cop movie, or it sounds like a military movie. And I think that's probably also why it was tough to market.
You know, it has a lot of similarities to cop movies and war movies, but it's, I don't know. How does this title not have fire in it?
I don't know. Absolutely not. Yeah, I don't know. All right, well, that's going to do it. We've been recording for a long time. That's going to do it for our show today. We'll see you next week for Top Gun. Nick, thank you so much for taking this journey into the fire with me.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we'll see you later.